This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I still haven't been able to sleep properly since that night. It's been almost 3 weeks and I find myself lying awake at 3 a.m., scrolling through cryptid forums and wildlife identification pages. I've always been a rational person, but what happened that night in the mountains has me questioning everything I thought I knew about the natural world. This all went down last month when I was visiting my hometown in rural Tennessee, about 30 miles from the Appalachian Mountains. I grew up there but moved away for college 5 years ago. I try to visit every few months to see my old friends Hannah and Chris, who never left. That Friday night, we decided to catch up over dinner at this little diner in the next town over. Nothing fancy, just somewhere we could talk without running into everyone we knew from high school. It was around 10:30 p.m. when we finally headed back. Hannah was driving her old Subaru, I was in the passenger seat, and Chris was sprawled out in the back. We were taking this winding back road that cuts through dense forest. It's about 15 miles shorter than the main highway, and at that time of night we figured we'd be the only ones on it. The road is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass each other, with no street lights and these sharp turns that force you to slow down to like 25 mph. The trees grow right up to the edge, creating this tunnel effect that's kind of cool during the day but seriously eerie at night. Hannah's headlights only illuminated maybe 20 feet ahead of us at any time. We were about halfway back, talking about some guy Chris had started dating, when Hannah suddenly slowed down. I didn't notice anything at first, and was about to ask why we were stopping when I saw it. There was something in the middle of our lane. At first glance, I thought it was just a regular wildcat or maybe a bobcat. They're pretty common in these parts, but even in that first moment, something felt off. Most animals dart away when they see headlights. This thing was completely still, sitting directly in our path, facing the car. "What is that?" Hannah whispered, slowing the car to a crawl. As we inched closer, I started to make out more details, and my stomach began to knot up. It wasn't a normal wildcat. The proportions were all wrong. It was about the size of a medium dog, but with a body shape that was definitely feline. Its fur was this sickly flesh color, not tan or brown like a mountain lion, but this pale pinkish beige that looked almost like human skin. Its legs seemed too long, and its ears were weirdly small for its head, but the eyes, God, the eyes. They caught the headlights and glowed this intense red-orange color with these yellow flecks that made them look like they were on fire. I've seen plenty of animals' eyes reflect light at night, that greenish or yellow shine, but this was different. They weren't just reflecting. They seemed to be generating their own light, like someone had put burning coals into the eye sockets of this cat. I swear they looked like the actual pits of hell. Hannah had slowed to maybe 5 mph, and we were now only about 10 feet from this thing. It still hadn't moved, not a twitch, not a tail flick, nothing. Just those burning eyes staring directly at us. "Drive around it," I said, my voice coming out strained. I couldn't explain why, but I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like my body was screaming at me that something was deeply wrong with whatever we were looking at. Hannah nodded and carefully steered to the right, giving the creature a wide berth. As we passed, I got a better look at it, and the knot in my stomach tightened. Its face was wrong. The snout was too short, almost pushed in, and its mouth seemed too wide. I could see what looked like teeth gleaming in the headlights, sharp and numerous, more than any cat should have. The whole time, this thing never moved. It didn't turn its head to follow our car. It didn't flinch when we passed within maybe 2 feet of it. It just sat there, rigid, like a taxidermy animal, except for those eyes that seemed to burn right through me. I kept my eyes on it as we passed, a cold sweat breaking out across my back. I couldn't look away even though every instinct was telling me to. Once we were past it, I twisted in my seat to keep watching through the rear window. "What the fuck was that?" Chris suddenly exclaimed from the back seat, breaking the tense silence. He had been quiet until now, and his voice made me jump. And then something happened that still gives me chills when I think about it. As Chris spoke, I was still looking back at the creature. In the split second after his words, it vanished, not ran away, not moved to the side of the road, just disappeared. One moment, it was there, those hellish eyes still visible in the red glow of the tail lights, and the next it was gone. There was nowhere it could have run to that quickly without me seeing it move. "It's gone," I said, my voice barely audible. "It just disappeared." Hannah was gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. She accelerated a bit, but not too much. The road was too dangerous to speed on, even with the 3 of us now thoroughly freaked out. "Did you guys see that thing's eyes?" Chris asked, leaning forward between the front seats. "They were fucking glowing." "And its skin," Hannah added. "It looked wrong, like it wasn't wearing its fur right or something." I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. The image of those burning eyes was imprinted in my mind. For the next few miles, we barely spoke, each lost in our own thoughts. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those eyes following us. Hannah's house was closest, so we decided to stop there first. None of us really wanted to be alone after what we'd seen. Her mom was still up watching TV when we walked in, and she immediately noticed something was off. "You 3 look like you've seen a ghost," she said, muting the television. Almost tripping over each other's words, we described what we'd seen on the road. I was expecting Hannah's mom to laugh it off or suggest it was just a weird-looking bobcat. But as we talked, her face grew increasingly pale. Was it sort of flesh-colored?" she asked when we finished. "With small ears and eyes that looked like fire?" The 3 of us just stared at her. My heart started pounding harder. "How did you know that?" Hannah asked, her voice shaking slightly. Hannah's mom sat down heavily on the couch. "Because I saw the same thing. 30 years ago, me and my cousin Marge were driving that same road coming back from a movie. It was staring at us from the bushes on the side of the road." She went on to describe exactly what we had seen. The unnatural stillness, the wrong proportions, those hellish eyes. The only difference was that in her encounter, the creature had been half hidden in the undergrowth rather than sitting in the middle of the road. "We called it the Hellcat," she said. "We told people about it, but everyone just said we'd seen a bobcat or a mountain lion in weird lighting. After a while, we stopped talking about it. I almost convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Until now." We stayed up late into the night, talking about what it could possibly be. Chris started Googling local folklore and cryptids on his phone, but nothing seemed to match what we'd seen. Bobcats don't have that coloring, and while mountain lions are bigger, they don't have those proportions or that face structure, and nothing explained those eyes or the way it had completely disappeared. The next morning, I was determined to figure out what we had encountered. I spent the day in the local library, digging through old newspaper archives and regional history books. I found a few vague mentions of strange animal sightings in the area dating back to the 1950s, but nothing specific enough to match our creature. I even talked to Old Man Jenkins, yes, that's really his name, who runs the bait shop and is kind of the unofficial local historian. He scratched his beard and mentioned that his grandfather used to warn kids about the devil's pet that prowled the mountain roads, but he always thought it was just a story to keep children from wandering too far from home. Over the past few weeks, I've gone down every rabbit hole I could find. I've researched cryptids like skinwalkers and wendigos, looked into demonic lore, and spent hours on wildlife identification websites. I've asked other locals if they've seen anything strange, which has mostly gotten me weird looks or vague stories that could be about anything. The rational part of me wants to believe it was just some diseased animal, maybe a bobcat with mange or some rare genetic condition. But that doesn't explain the eyes, or the way it disappeared, or the fact that Hannah's mom saw the exact same thing 3 decades ago. Chris thinks it might be some kind of skinwalker, a malevolent witch from Native American legend that can take animal form. Hannah leans toward it being a demonic entity. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that I can't shake the memory of those burning eyes staring into mine, like they were looking straight through to my soul. I drove back down that road the next day in broad daylight, looking for any sign of the creature, tracks, fur, anything. There was nothing. I've been back 3 times since, always during daylight, but there's no trace that anything was ever there. What scares me most is the thought that it's still out there, sitting motionless in the dark, waiting for the next car to come along. I wonder how many others have seen it over the years and either didn't talk about it or weren't believed. I wonder if it's always been there in those dark Tennessee woods, watching with those hellish eyes. I leave for graduate school in Michigan next week, and part of me is relieved to be putting hundreds of miles between myself and whatever that thing was. But another part of me knows that distance won't matter. Those eyes will follow me in my dreams. And every time I drive down a dark, lonely road, I'll be scanning the shadows, terrified of seeing that flesh-colored form and those burning eyes. Hannah, Chris, and I have made a pact not to drive that road at night anymore. Hannah's mom hasn't used it after dark for 30 years, but the thing is, avoiding that one stretch of road doesn't make me feel safe, because now I know that things like the Hellcat exist in our world, things that shouldn't be possible, things that defy explanation. And once you know that, nowhere feels completely safe again. I don't know if I'll ever find out what we saw that night. Was it a bobcat or mountain lion with some bizarre deformity? A cryptid that's managed to stay mostly hidden? Some kind of demonic entity? Or something else entirely that has no name in any human language? All I know is that those burning eyes haunt me every night when I close my own. And sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can feel something watching me from the darkness of my room, something unnaturally still, with flesh-colored fur and eyes like the pits of hell. I still can't sleep right. It's been 3 months since I moved back to the city, but I keep waking up thinking I hear scratching at my door. I know this sounds crazy, but I need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive. I don't care if you believe me or not. I just need someone to hear this. Back in March, my grandfather passed away unexpectedly. He and my grandmother lived on a small ranch outside Blanding, Utah, on reservation land that's been in our family for generations. My grandmother was devastated. They'd been married for 56 years. My parents wanted her to move to Phoenix with them, but she refused to leave the ranch. That's just how Navajo elders are sometimes, stubborn about their land and traditions. I was between jobs and had just finished my associate's degree, so I volunteered to stay with her for a few months until she got back on her feet. I'd always been close with my grandparents, and the ranch held good memories for me from childhood summers spent there. My girlfriend and I had just broken up too, so the timing seemed right for a change of scenery. The only companion I brought with me was my cat, Rusty, a big orange tabby I'd had for about 4 years. I rescued him from a shelter when he was just a kitten, and he'd been with me through college, breakups, everything. He was an indoor-outdoor cat who always came when called and usually slept at the foot of my bed. My grandmother seemed happy to have us both there. The ranch is pretty isolated. The nearest neighbor is about 2 miles away, and the property itself is about 15 acres with a small herd of sheep, a few chickens, and a barn where my grandfather used to keep his tools and old truck. The main house is a modest 3-bedroom place built in the 70s, nothing fancy but comfortable. The first couple weeks were uneventful. I helped my grandmother with chores, fixed some things around the property that had fallen into disrepair, and spent my evenings reading or watching TV while Rusty explored his new surroundings. He seemed to love the ranch, lots of mice to chase in the barn, birds to watch, and sunshine to nap in. Then one morning, Rusty didn't come in for breakfast. I wasn't immediately worried. He sometimes went on longer hunts and would show up later in the day, hungry and looking pleased with himself. But when evening came and he still hadn't returned, I got concerned. I called for him around the property, checked the barn, looked under the porch, all the usual spots. Nothing. The next day I made flyers and posted them at the trading post and the gas station in town, about 20 minutes away. I spent hours walking the perimeter of the property calling his name. This wasn't like him at all. He'd never gone missing before. My grandmother was sympathetic, but not particularly worried. "Animals come and go on the land," she said in that matter-of-fact way of hers, but I could tell something was bothering her. When I pressed her, she just shook her head and mumbled something in Navajo that I couldn't catch. 5 days after Rusty disappeared, I was checking the fence line behind the barn when I saw something orange in the tall grass. My heart dropped. I knew immediately it was Rusty, and I knew he wasn't alive. What I found was wrong. It was Rusty's fur and skin, completely intact, like a perfect orange tabby cat suit, lying flat on the ground. There was no blood, no signs of trauma, just empty skin and fur, like someone had meticulously removed every bone and organ from his body without tearing the skin. And the strangest part, there were these splotches of paint on his fur, red, yellow, and white paint, in no particular pattern, just dotted here and there. I was simultaneously heartbroken and horrified. This wasn't a normal animal attack. Coyotes or mountain lions tear their prey apart. They don't carefully remove the insides while leaving the skin intact. And the paint, what the hell was the paint about? I ran back to the house, crying and trying not to throw up. My grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table, and when I told her what I'd found, she went pale. She wouldn't come look at it. Instead, she got up, went to her bedroom, and came back with a small wooden box about the size of a shoebox and a handful of herbs I didn't recognize. "Put him in this," she said quietly, "and bury him deep. Mark the spot with a stone, but don't tell me where." She gave me the herbs and told me to sprinkle them in the box with Rusty's remains. I was confused and still in shock, but I did what she asked. I carefully gathered Rusty's empty fur and placed it in the box. It was light, too light, and felt wrong in my hands. I sprinkled the herbs over him. They smelled like sage and something else I couldn't identify. I found a spot near an old juniper tree about 50 yards from the house, dug a hole about 3 feet deep, and buried the box. I found a flat stone nearby, painted it orange with some of my grandfather's old paint from the barn, and placed it over the grave. I sat there for a while crying and trying to make sense of what had happened to my cat. What kind of animal or person would do something like that? When I got back to the house, my grandmother was burning something in a clay bowl, walking from room to room, wafting the smoke with a feather. She wouldn't talk about Rusty anymore or explain what she was doing. She just said, "Don't speak of dead things after sundown." I wanted to press her for answers, but the look on her face stopped me. She was scared, and my grandmother was not a woman who scared easily. That night I had trouble sleeping. Around 2 a.m. I was jolted awake by what sounded like meowing outside my window. Not just any meowing. It was Rusty's distinctive meow, the trilling sound he made when he wanted to come inside. I froze, listening. It came again, followed by scratching at the window screen. I told myself it was just the wind or my imagination. It had to be. I'd buried Rusty that afternoon. But the sounds continued, moving from the window to what sounded like the back door of the house. Scratching, meowing, then silence. I lay there, paralyzed with fear, until dawn broke. In the morning light, I convinced myself I'd dreamed it all. Grief plays tricks on the mind, right? I didn't mention it to my grandmother. That day passed normally. I helped my grandmother with the sheep, fixed a leaky pipe in the bathroom, tried to keep busy to avoid thinking about Rusty. But as night fell, I felt a growing sense of dread. Sure enough, that night it happened again. Around the same time, 2 a.m., I heard the meowing. This time it was definitely coming from the back door. Scratch, scratch, meow. Scratch, scratch, meow. Then silence. I gathered my courage, grabbed a flashlight, and went to check. The rational part of my brain was saying it was probably just a stray cat or some other animal. The back door was closed and locked as we'd left it before bed. I opened it slowly, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. No cat, no animal of any kind. Just the empty yard, the distant outline of the barn, and the juniper trees swaying slightly in the night breeze. I closed and locked the door, double-checking it, and went back to bed. But I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. This time it sounded like it was coming from right outside my bedroom door, inside the house. Scratch, scratch, meow. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. "Rusty," I whispered, immediately feeling stupid. My cat was dead. I'd buried him myself. The scratching stopped. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a sort of wet, sliding noise, like something damp dragging itself across the floorboards. It moved past my door, down the hallway, toward my grandmother's room. I shot out of bed and flung open my door, flashlight ready. The hallway was empty. I checked my grandmother's room. She was sound asleep. Her door had been closed the whole time. I checked every room in the house, every closet, under every bed. Nothing. By morning, I was a wreck. I hadn't slept, couldn't eat, and couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I finally broke down and told my grandmother about the sounds. She didn't seem surprised. She just nodded slowly and said, "You need to check the grave." "What? Why?" "Just check it. But take this." She handed me a small leather pouch on a string. "Wear it around your neck. Don't take it off." The pouch smelled strongly of herbs and something metallic. I put it on, feeling ridiculous but too freaked out to argue. I grabbed a shovel from the barn and headed to the juniper tree where I'd buried Rusty. The orange-painted stone was still there, undisturbed. The ground around it looked normal, no signs of digging or disturbance. I almost turned back, feeling foolish for letting my imagination run wild. But something compelled me to check, just to be sure. I started digging. The soil came up easily, still loose from when I'd buried the box. About 2 feet down, I hit wood. The box was exactly where I'd left it. I uncovered it fully and lifted it out of the hole. It felt different, heavier somehow, but in a different way. My hands were shaking as I opened the lid. What I saw inside made me drop the box back into the hole. Instead of Rusty's empty skin and fur, there was a complete cat skeleton. Clean bones arranged perfectly in the shape of a cat. No fur, no skin, no organs, just bones, and traces of the paint I'd seen before, red, yellow, and white, now just faint stains on some of the bones. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. This was impossible. I'd buried Rusty's skin and fur. I was certain of it. There had been no bones. Now there was nothing but bones. And where had the skin gone? I ran back to the house, shovel still in hand. My grandmother was sitting on the porch, as if waiting for me. Before I could speak, she held up her hand. "Don't tell me what you saw," she said. "Cover it back up and come inside." That night, my grandmother finally told me what she suspected was happening. She spoke quietly, constantly glancing at the windows even though the curtains were drawn. "After your grandfather died, something changed on the land," she said. "I've felt it watching the house. Your cat probably saw it and got too close." "Saw what?" I asked. She shook her head. "We don't speak their names. The skin changers, the ones who walk between." She was talking about skinwalkers, Ye Naldlushi in Navajo. I'd heard stories about them growing up, but like most young people, I'd written them off as superstition. Navajo witches who could transform into animals by wearing their skins. But the way my grandmother spoke about them now, with genuine fear in her voice, shook me. "They're attracted to grief," she continued. "They feed on it. When your grandfather passed, it opened a door, and now it's trying to come through." "Using Rusty?" I asked, my voice breaking. "It took his skin to wear, but couldn't take his spirit. Now it's trying to get in." That night, the scratching and meowing were louder than ever. But now there was something else. A low, humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. My grandmother and I sat up all night in the living room, a fire burning in the fireplace despite the mild spring weather. She burned herbs and murmured prayers in Navajo. I sat clutching the leather pouch she'd given me, jumping at every sound. Near dawn, something heavy hit the front door. Not scratching this time, a solid thud, like a body being thrown against it. My grandmother grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in painfully. "Don't open it," she whispered. "No matter what you hear. What I heard next will haunt me until the day I die." It was Rusty's meow, but wrong somehow, like someone trying to imitate it but not quite getting it right. Then came a voice, soft and raspy. "Let me in. I'm cold out here." It wasn't Rusty's voice. Cats don't talk. But it wasn't quite human either. It was something in between, something pretending. We sat frozen as the voice called again, this time louder. "I can see you in there. Let me in." The door handle jiggled, though I'd locked it myself earlier. Something scratched at the door, no longer trying to sound like cat claws, but making deep splintering grooves in the wood. I could see them forming from the inside, 4 parallel lines being carved through the solid oak door. Just as the first light of dawn broke, everything went silent. My grandmother sagged in relief, muttering thanks in Navajo. I was too terrified to move. When we finally worked up the courage to open the door after full sunrise, the outside of the door was unmarked. No scratches, no damage at all. But on the inside, 4 deep grooves ran from top to bottom, like something had tried to claw its way in from outside to inside, without leaving marks on the exterior. I left the ranch 3 days later. My grandmother came with me, finally agreeing to stay with my parents in Phoenix. We never went back to check Rusty's grave again. We left most of our belongings behind, taking only clothes and a few family heirlooms. Before we left, my grandmother made me promise never to research skinwalkers, never to speak about them unnecessarily, and especially never to think about them after dark. Attention calls them, she said. Even thinking about them opens a door. I've kept that promise until now. I'm breaking it by writing this, but I had to tell someone. The nightmares won't stop. I keep hearing scratching at my door at night, though I live in a secure apartment building now. Sometimes I think I see orange fur out of the corner of my eye, but when I turn to look, it's gone. If you've read this far, I'm sorry to have put these thoughts in your head, but please heed my grandmother's warning. Don't go looking for information about these things. Don't even think about them after the sun goes down. Attention calls them, and once they notice you, they don't forget. I still wear the pouch my grandmother gave me. I don't know if it helps, but I'm afraid to take it off. Sometimes I catch my parents looking at me with worry in their eyes, but how can I explain what happened? How can anyone believe that my cat's skin disappeared from its grave, replaced by bones that weren't there before? All I know is that something followed us from Utah. I feel it watching sometimes, waiting, and I still don't know what those colors meant. The red, yellow, and white paint on Rusty's fur. My grandmother wouldn't explain it, just said it was their mark, whatever that means. Don't go looking for answers. Some things should stay unknown. I still have nightmares about that sound. It's been 3 months since I left Alaska, and I wake up drenched in sweat at least twice a week, thinking I hear it again. That howl that wasn't quite a howl. But I should start from the beginning. I never planned to become a park ranger. I was a high school biology teacher for 8 years in Anchorage until budget cuts left me unemployed. The timing couldn't have been worse, right in the middle of a messy divorce that drained my savings and left me with a mountain of debt. When I saw the posting for a seasonal ranger position at Denali National Park, I jumped at it despite the terrible pay. At least it came with housing, a small cabin near Wonder Lake, about 85 miles into the park. My Dana-Ina grandmother used to call me Ella, which means the one who watches. She'd tell me I had the patience to observe what others missed. I guess that's why I was drawn to biology, and later to that isolated spot in the wilderness. I should have remembered the other things she used to tell me, about creatures that lived in the shadows between our world and theirs. The park superintendent seemed surprised when I accepted the position. "Most people don't last long at the Wonder Lake outpost," she said. "It's isolated. Cell service is spotty at best, and your nearest neighbor is 15 miles away." "Sounds perfect," I replied. After the chaos of the divorce and losing my job, isolation was exactly what I needed. I moved into the cabin on May 2nd. It was small but functional. One room with a wood stove, a single bed, a desk, and a kitchenette. The bathroom was surprisingly modern, with running water pumped from a well. The windows faced the lake on one side and the vast expanse of tundra on the other, with Denali itself visible on clear days. That first night, I was unpacking my books when I heard it. A howl in the distance, but wrong somehow. I'd heard wolves before. I'd lived in Alaska my whole life. But this was different. It started like a normal wolf howl, but then shifted into something that sounded almost like words, with odd inflections that made the hair on my arms stand up. It sounded like it was trying to mimic human speech. I told myself it was just the wind, or some weird acoustic effect from the mountains. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I found tracks around my cabin. They circled the entire perimeter, as if something had been pacing around while I slept. They looked canine. Too big for a fox, but not quite right for a wolf. The spacing was off too, more like the stride of a bipedal creature than a quadruped. I took pictures and sent them to the wildlife biologist at headquarters, trying to sound casual. Interesting wolf tracks by my cabin. Might be walking funny due to an injury? She replied a few hours later. Not a wolf we're tracking. Could be a large coyote with a limp. Keep me posted if you see the animal. I didn't tell her the tracks were only on 2 feet. That afternoon, I got my first emergency call. A hiker named Tyler Peterson had separated from his group near Savage River and hadn't returned to their meeting point. He'd been missing for about 6 hours. I grabbed my pack and headed out in the park vehicle, a rugged Jeep that had seen better days. I found Tyler's group at the Savage River Loop trailhead. They were college students on spring break, woefully unprepared for the Alaskan wilderness. According to them, Tyler had wanted to see something cool off trail and told them he'd catch up. That was at 10 a.m. It was now 4 p.m. and temperatures would drop below freezing after sunset. I radioed for backup, but with limited staff this early in the season, I was told to begin the search while they assembled a proper team from headquarters. Tyler's friends showed me roughly where they'd last seen him, and I found his tracks leading away from the trail. Nearby, I spotted his backpack snagged on a bush. Inside was a half-empty water bottle, a granola bar wrapper, and his phone, dead. The tracks continued past the backpack, but they were joined by something else, the same odd canine prints I'd seen around my cabin, but fresher. They seemed to be following Tyler's path. My stomach knotted as I radioed this information, careful to describe them only as possible wolf tracks. I followed both sets of prints for about 2 miles until they led to one of the emergency shelters scattered throughout the park. These simple structures, basically 3 walls, a roof, and a raised floor, provided basic protection from the elements. As I approached the shelter, the weather turned. Snow began falling heavily, obscuring visibility. That's when I saw it, a figure standing about 50 yards from the shelter, partially hidden by the swirling snow. It was tall, at least 7 feet, standing on 2 legs. Its head was distinctly canine, with a long snout and pointed ears. It seemed to be watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. The snow was coming down hard now, and I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. I hurried to the shelter, calling Tyler's name. He was inside, huddled in a corner, shivering despite having built a small fire in the designated pit. His eyes were wide with fear, and he flinched when I entered. "Thank God," he said, his voice cracking. "It wouldn't let me leave." "What wouldn't let you leave?" I asked, setting down my pack and pulling out an emergency blanket for him. "I don't know what it was," he whispered. "I thought it was a wolf at first, but it stood up, like a man. It's been circling the shelter for hours." His hands were shaking as he clutched the blanket around himself. I checked him for injuries. Besides being cold and dehydrated, he seemed physically fine. I gave him water and some high-calorie energy bars from my pack, then radioed our location. Due to the sudden snowstorm, the search team wouldn't reach us until morning. We were stuck there for the night. As darkness fell, the howling started again. That same unsettling sound, half wolf, half human. Tyler began to cry silently. "It's just wolves," I said, trying to sound confident. "They won't bother us." "That's not a wolf," he replied, staring at the shelter entrance. "Listen to it. It's trying to talk. I couldn't deny it. There was a cadence to the howling that sounded like language, rising and falling in patterns too complex for animal vocalizations, and it was getting closer. Throughout that long night, the creature circled our shelter. Occasionally, we'd hear scratching at the walls or roof. Once, I swear I heard something that sounded like my name, whispered just outside the entrance. Tyler heard it too, his name, called in a gravelly approximation of a human voice. We kept the fire going and didn't sleep. By dawn, the snowstorm had passed, and the search team arrived with snowmobiles. Tyler was borderline hypothermic and slightly disoriented. When the team asked what happened, he muttered something about getting lost and finding the shelter. He didn't mention the creature. Neither did I. They took Tyler to the medical center in Healy, and I returned to my cabin. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. Nothing was missing, but things had been moved slightly. Books taken from shelves and replaced at angles, my clothes rummaged through, food containers opened and closed. On my pillow was a dead snowshoe hare, its neck broken cleanly. Not torn or bitten, just snapped with surgical precision. A gift? A warning? I couldn't tell. I should have left then. Any rational person would have. But I've always been stubborn, and now I was curious. I started researching local folklore, particularly Athabascan legends. I found references to creatures called adlet, or dogmen, beings that were half human, half dog, said to live in the far north. Some stories described them as dangerous, others as messengers between worlds. 3 days later, while I was still researching, I received a visitor, an elderly Athabascan man named Thomas, who occasionally worked as a cultural interpreter for the park. He claimed he was just checking on the new ranger, but the way he looked around my cabin suggested otherwise. "You've seen them, haven't you?" he asked finally, sitting at my small table with a cup of coffee. "Seen what?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "The tall ones, the ones that watch from the trees." He sipped his coffee calmly. "They're more active now. Something's disturbed them." "What are they?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "They've been here longer than us," Thomas said. "They appear when humans disturb the balance. They're trying to restore it in their way." He wouldn't elaborate further, just advised me to listen if they speak to you. Then he left, refusing my offer to drive him back to the main road. That night, I got another emergency call. A teenage boy named Marcus had wandered away from his family's campsite. I grabbed my gear and headed out, a sense of dread growing with each mile. I found Marcus's tracks easily enough, sneakers with a distinctive tread, and alongside them, those now familiar canine prints, walking on 2 legs. I followed them deep into a section of the park rarely visited by tourists, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The tracks led to a structure I'd never seen before and wasn't on any park map, a crude shelter built from branches, bones, and animal hides. It was surprisingly well constructed, with a small entrance that required me to crouch down. "Marcus," I called, shining my light inside. "Park Service. Are you in there?" A frightened voice answered. "Help me, please. It keeps coming back." I crawled inside to find Marcus, about 15 years old, curled up on a bed of dry grasses and leaves. The shelter was warm despite the cool night air, and decorated with strange symbols etched into pieces of bone and wood hanging from the ceiling. Some looked like protection sigils I recognized from my grandmother's teachings. "Are you hurt?" I asked, checking him over with my flashlight. "No, it brought me food and water." He pointed to a wooden bowl containing clean water and another with strips of raw meat. "It wanted me to eat, but I was too scared." As I helped Marcus to his feet, I heard movement outside. Through the entrance, I saw it clearly this time, a tall lupine figure standing on two legs. Its fur was dark gray, almost black, and its eyes reflected my flashlight with an eerie green glow. It was watching us, head slightly tilted as if curious. Marcus whimpered behind me. I slowly reached for my sidearm, but something made me hesitate. The creature wasn't acting aggressively. It seemed intelligent. It raised one hand, a strange hybrid of human fingers and canine claws, and touched its chest. Then it pointed at Marcus, then at me. It was trying to communicate. I stood frozen, unsure what to do. Then the creature bent down and used its claw to scratch something into the dirt outside the shelter entrance. It looked at me once more before loping away into the forest, moving with unsettling grace for something so large. When it was gone, I helped Marcus outside and looked at what it had scratched in the dirt, the same protection sigil that hung inside the shelter. I got Marcus back to his family, who were camped near the park entrance. Like Tyler, he was physically unharmed, but clearly traumatized. I recommended they take him to the medical center in Healy for a checkup. The next day, I visited the medical center myself, curious about both Tyler and Marcus. The nurse practitioner was a friend from my teaching days in Anchorage, and after some persuasion, she shared their medical information with me. Both patients showed unusual symptoms: elevated body temperature, increased heart rate, and most concerning, unusual brain activity on their EEGs. Their pupils had also become unusually reflective, similar to those of nocturnal animals. The doctors were baffled. That night, I couldn't sleep. The howling had returned, sounding closer to my cabin than ever before. Around 3 a.m., I gave up and went outside, armed with my sidearm and a powerful flashlight. The night was clear, with the aurora borealis painting the sky in greens and purples. "I know you're out there," I called, my voice sounding small in the vast wilderness. "What do you want?" In response, a howl rose from the tree line, that same unsettling, almost speech, then silence. I was about to go back inside when I noticed fresh tracks leading away from my cabin. Without thinking, I followed them. The tracks led me for nearly 2 hours, deep into a part of the park I'd never explored. They ended at the edge of a hidden valley tucked between two mountains. From my vantage point on a ridge, I could see a collection of those same crude shelters I'd found Marcus in, arranged in a rough circle. Moving between them were several of the creatures, some fully lupine in appearance, others seeming more humanoid with just hints of wolf features. And among them, to my horror, was Tyler. He wasn't being held captive. He was moving freely, though his gait was odd, almost loping. When he turned in my direction, I could see his face had begun to change, his jaw slightly elongated, his eyes reflecting the moonlight like an animal's. Before I could retreat, I felt a presence behind me. I turned to find the largest of the creatures standing there, its features more defined than the others. It had an almost regal bearing, and its eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably self-aware. It spoke, not with its mouth, but somehow directly into my mind. "You are the one who watches," it said, using my grandmother's name for me. "We have been watching you too, James Nikolai." I raised my gun with shaking hands. "What are you? What have you done to Tyler?" "We are the first people," it replied. "Before your kind spread across the land. We need vessels to continue our existence. Our numbers dwindle. Our children are born less and less human with each generation. You're changing them." I lowered my gun slightly, trying to comprehend. "They were chosen. The change has begun in you as well. You have heard our calls. You have followed our signs." It gestured toward the valley. We need bridges between worlds, those who can walk in both forms. I realized with growing dread that it was right. I'd been experiencing changes I'd attributed to stress. My night vision had improved dramatically. My sense of smell had become so acute I could identify visitors to my cabin before seeing them. And the howls. They were starting to sound like language I could almost understand. The full moon comes in 3 days, the creature continued. You have a choice, Ella. Fight the change and likely die as your body rejects itself. Accept a partial change, becoming a guardian of both worlds with enhanced abilities, or surrender fully to become one of us. It stepped closer, its breath visible in the cool night air. You have your grandmother's blood, the old one's blood. You were always meant to be a bridge. I backed away, my mind reeling. I need time to think. 3 days, it repeated. We will come for your answer. I ran back to my cabin, packed essential supplies, and drove to the park headquarters. I told them I was sick and needed a few days off. No one questioned it. I probably looked terrible. I checked into a motel in Healy and tried to make sense of what was happening. I researched everything I could find about the Adlet and similar legends from around the world. I called my cousin, who knew more about our grandmother's stories, but she just warned me to respect the old ways and hung up. On the 3rd day, I felt the change accelerating. My teeth ached as if they were shifting in my gums. My fingernails thickened and darkened. My senses became overwhelming. I could hear conversations from rooms away, smell what everyone in the building had eaten that day. That night, I drove back to my cabin, drawn there by something I couldn't explain. The full moon illuminated the landscape, making it almost as bright as day to my enhanced vision. They were waiting for me, a semicircle of the creatures around my cabin. The leader stepped forward as I got out of my vehicle. "Have you made your choice, Ella?" it asked in my mind. I was about to answer when a Park Service helicopter flew overhead, shining a spotlight down on us. The creatures scattered into the trees, moving with incredible speed. The leader paused at the edge of the forest. "They search for the missing ones," it said. "Soon they will search for you as well. Choose quickly." Then it was gone. The helicopter landed in the clearing near my cabin, and 2 rangers rushed out, looking concerned. "James, thank God you're okay," one shouted over the rotor noise. "We've got multiple missing persons now." Tyler Peterson checked himself out of the medical center and disappeared. Same with that kid Marcus. 3 more hikers gone missing since yesterday. The superintendent called in state troopers and more search teams. I nodded, barely processing their words. My skin felt too tight, like something was trying to push through from inside. "James, you don't look good, man. Let's get you to a doctor." I backed away from them. "I'm fine, just need some rest." They exchanged glances. One of them spoke into his radio, too quiet for a normal person to hear, but my enhanced hearing picked it up clearly. "He's acting strange. Eyes look weird. Might be infected with whatever the others had." The change was accelerating. I could feel my bones wanting to shift, my muscles spasming. The moon pulled at something deep inside me. "I have to go," I said, my voice sounding strange even to me. "Tell everyone to stay out of the North Valley. It's not safe." I ran into the forest before they could stop me. Behind me, I heard them shouting, the helicopter powering up again. But I was faster now, moving through the trees with a new agility I'd never possessed. I reached the hidden valley just as the moon reached its zenith. The whole colony was there, gathered in a circle. Tyler and Marcus were among them, their transformations nearly complete. They looked at peace with their new forms. The leader stepped forward, extending a clawed hand toward me. "What is your choice, Ella?" I felt the change threatening to overwhelm me. Fighting it was becoming painful, my very cells rebelling against my human form. But surrendering meant leaving behind everything I'd known. In that moment, I heard my grandmother's voice in my head. Ella, the one who watches. Some must stand between worlds to keep balance. I made my choice, but I can't tell you what it was. I don't know if anyone will ever find this account. I've written it all down while I still remember who I was, who James Nicolai was. My memories of my human life are fading with each passing day. The helicopters still fly overhead sometimes. I hear them searching. They'll never find what they're looking for. And if you're hiking in Denali and hear a howl that sounds almost like words, keep walking. Don't look back. Don't follow the tracks. But if you hear your name called in the darkness, I'm sorry. It means you've been chosen too. I never wanted to be a park ranger. But after what happened with my parents, I needed to get as far away as possible from creditors, collection agents, and the endless bills that kept piling up after the funeral expenses. My parents never had life insurance, just a mountain of medical debt that somehow became mine. The ranger position at Kaibab National Forest was the perfect escape. Remote cabin, minimal human contact, a decent government paycheck that would slowly chip away at what I owed. 3 months in, I was still adjusting to the isolation. The other rangers called the area I patrolled dead zone because radio signals struggled to reach it. That suited me fine. My grandmother would have appreciated the irony. She was full Navajo and always told me our people understood the value of silence. I'm only part Navajo through her, but out here, those teachings felt more relevant than ever. It was mid-October when everything changed. I was finishing my morning coffee when Supervisor Harris radioed in about a missing hiker. David Chen, 27, experienced backpacker, hadn't checked in with his girlfriend for 2 days. His last known location was near the Blackwater Cave system, a restricted area about 6 miles from my station. Talasi, you're closest. We need you to check it out before we call search and rescue. His girlfriend says he mentioned wanting to photograph Blackwater, though he knew it was off limits. I grabbed my gear, first aid kit, extra water, flashlight, bear spray, satellite phone, for emergencies only, and my service pistol. I rarely carried the gun, but something about this call made me uneasy. The hike to Blackwater took nearly 2 hours. The cave system had been closed to the public for years, supposedly for conservation purposes, but I'd heard rumors about unstable tunnels and people going missing. The entrance was marked with faded warning signs and yellow tape that had seen better days. I found David's car parked about a 1/4 mile from the trailhead, tucked behind some juniper trees like he was trying to hide it. Not a good sign. I radioed it in, then continued toward the caves. The trail was overgrown but still visible. I checked for tracks and found fresh boot prints heading toward the cave entrance. About 50 yards from the mouth of the main cave, I spotted it. A single hiking boot, high-end, thrown into a thicket of scrub oak. When I picked it up, my stomach dropped. The back was soaked with dried blood. That's when I noticed the drag marks and blood trail leading toward the cave entrance. I radioed Harris immediately. I found evidence of injury, possible blood trail leading into Blackwater, requesting search and rescue backup. Static answered me. Of course, dead zone. I tried the satellite phone. Nothing. Later I would learn there was some kind of unusual magnetic disturbance in the area that day that disrupted all communications. At the time, I just figured it was bad luck. I stood there for a long moment, weighing my options. Protocol said to return to an area with radio coverage and call it in again. But if Chen was injured in those caves, he might not have much time. The temperature was dropping, and hypothermia would set in quickly if he was immobile and losing blood. I clicked on my flashlight and followed the blood trail into the cave. The entrance was larger than I expected, about 15 feet high and twice as wide. The blood trail continued inside, but grew fainter. The air temperature dropped immediately, and the smell hit me, a musty animal odor mixed with something else, something I couldn't identify. I called out, "David Chen, Park Service, are you in here?" My voice echoed, bouncing back at me from unseen corners. Nothing. About 50 feet in, the main passage split into 3 tunnels. The blood trail seemed to lead into the rightmost passage, so I followed it, keeping my flashlight beam low to track the sporadic droplets. The tunnel narrowed as I went deeper, the ceiling dropping until I had to crouch slightly. The air felt heavy, almost pressing against my skin. I called out again, and this time I thought I heard something, a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across stone. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. Then I heard breathing. Not human breathing. This was deeper, rhythmic, like a large animal. It came from somewhere ahead in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. "Hello, David?" My voice sounded thin, fragile. The breathing stopped. Then something moved in the darkness, something massive. My flashlight caught just a glimpse. A shape at least 7 feet tall, moving with unexpected grace for its size. For a split second, I saw what looked like a canine head, but much larger than any wolf I'd ever seen, before it disappeared around a bend in the passage. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Everything in me screamed to turn around and get out. But if Chen was in here, injured, and with whatever that was, I couldn't leave him. I unholstered my pistol and continued forward, moving as quietly as possible. The passage widened into a small chamber with a ceiling high enough that my flashlight couldn't reach it. The blood trail ended here. That's when I heard the whimpering. It came from a small crevice in the far wall, barely visible until I shined my light directly at it. I approached cautiously, gun ready, and called out again. "David Chen, I'm Ranger Talasi from Park Service. Are you hurt?" The whimpering stopped, replaced by a hoarse voice. I'm here. Please, help me." I squeezed through the crevice, which opened into another chamber about the size of a small bedroom. And there, huddled against the far wall, was David Chen. He was alive, but terrified. His left leg was bandaged with strips of his own shirt, and his face was pale beneath a week's worth of stubble. "Thank God," he whispered when he saw me. "We have to get out of here, now, before it comes back." "Are you talking about what I just saw in the tunnel? What is it?" His eyes darted nervously toward the crevice. "I don't know. It's been keeping me here. Every time I try to leave, it herds me back, like a sheepdog. It's intelligent." I helped him to his feet, noticing his left ankle was badly swollen. "What happened to your leg?" "I fell when I was running from it the first time. It wasn't trying to hurt me. It just doesn't want me to leave." We squeezed back through the crevice into the larger chamber. I was supporting most of Chen's weight, and he was shivering uncontrollably, probably from shock and the cold. "We need to move quickly," I said. "Can you make it?" He nodded, teeth chattering. "Just don't let go of me, please." We started back the way I'd come, moving as fast as Chen's injury would allow. I kept my flashlight sweeping ahead of us, searching for any sign of the creature. We'd made it about halfway back to the main passage when we heard it. The same heavy breathing, now behind us. "It's blocking the exit," Chen whispered, his fingers digging into my arm. I raised my gun, pointing it back the way we'd come, but saw nothing. The breathing seemed to be moving, circling around us through passages I couldn't see. "There's another way out," Chen said suddenly. "It took me through the caves. There's another exit that leads to a valley. It's how it brought me in after I hurt my leg. Are you sure you can find it?" "I think so. It's through that tunnel." He pointed to a passage I hadn't noticed before, off to our left. We changed direction, moving deeper into the cave system. I kept glancing behind us, but saw nothing following. The new passage sloped downward, taking us further underground. The air grew noticeably damper, and I could hear water dripping somewhere ahead. After about 10 minutes of slow progress, Chen stopped. "This doesn't look right. The passage I remember was wider, and there was a stream running alongside it." I shined my light around, trying to get my bearings. That's when I noticed the markings on the wall, crude arrows scratched into the stone, pointing the way we'd been heading. They looked fresh. "Did you make these?" I asked. Chen shook his head. "No, I've never seen those before." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cave temperature. "I think it's manipulating us, changing the trail markings to lead us somewhere." As if in confirmation, we heard the breathing again, now ahead of us, further down the passage we'd been following. We turned around and retraced our steps, moving as quickly as Chen's injury allowed. At each junction, I carefully checked the walls for markings, avoiding any passage with the scratched arrows. The cave system was more extensive than I'd realized. We'd been underground for at least an hour, and I was starting to worry about Chen's condition. He was leaning more heavily on me, his face glistening with sweat despite the cold. We rounded a corner and found ourselves in a large chamber with a high, domed ceiling. Natural light filtered in from somewhere above, the first light we'd seen since entering the caves. Chen collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. "We need to rest," he gasped. I checked his injured leg. The makeshift bandage was soaked through with fresh blood. All our movement had reopened the wound. I used supplies from my first aid kit to properly clean and dress it, then gave him some water and an energy bar from my pack. While he rested, I explored the chamber, looking for the source of the light. Near the top of the dome, about 30 feet up, was a narrow fissure that opened to the outside. Far too small and too high to use as an exit, but at least it told me we were close to the surface. That's when I remembered my grandmother's stories. She used to tell me about the ancient beings of the northern legends, creatures that walked between the human and animal worlds. Shapeshifters, some called them, but she said they were more than that. They were guardians of the threshold between worlds, protectors of sacred places. "We've trespassed in its territory," I said, more to myself than to Chen. He looked up at me, eyes wide. "What?" "The creature. I think it's protecting this place. That's why it hasn't hurt you. It's just keeping you here." "That doesn't make me feel better," Chen muttered. I was about to respond when we heard it again. The heavy breathing, now at the entrance to the chamber. We both turned toward the sound. It stood there in the shadows, just beyond the reach of the filtered light. Taller than any man, covered in thick, dark fur. It stood upright on two legs, but its head was unmistakably canine. Amber eyes reflected our flashlight beam, and its mouth was slightly open, showing teeth that could easily tear through flesh. But it wasn't attacking. It was watching us, waiting. I remembered more of my grandmother's teachings, how to approach sacred beings, how to show respect. Slowly I set down my gun and raised my open palms toward the creature in a traditional gesture of peaceful intent. "We mean no harm," I said quietly. "We're just trying to find our way out." The creature tilted its head, studying me. Its gaze seemed to fix on something on my uniform, my Park Service insignia. Then, to my astonishment, it stepped aside, clearing the passage. "It's letting us go," I whispered to Chen. "Don't make any sudden moves." We edged toward the passage, Chen leaning heavily on me. The creature watched us, its breathing loud in the silence of the cave. We were almost past it when Chen reached for his pocket. "My camera," he murmured. "Need to document." Before I could stop him, he'd pulled out a small digital camera. The flash went off, blindingly bright in the dim cave. The creature roared, a sound so primal and powerful that I felt it in my chest more than heard it. In an instant, it was on us, knocking Chen to the ground. I grabbed for my gun, but the creature was too fast. It pinned Chen with one massive paw-like hand and turned to face me, baring its teeth. For a moment, we stared at each other. Then, incredibly, it backed away from Chen. It made a series of sounds, not quite speech, but not animal noises either. Then it turned and loped away into the darkness of the cave. Chen was shaking uncontrollably. "What just happened? Why didn't it kill us?" I helped him up, my own hands trembling. "I don't know, but let's not wait for it to change its mind." We followed the passage the creature had been guarding and found ourselves ascending. Within 20 minutes, we saw daylight ahead, real, bright daylight. The exit led out onto a small ledge overlooking a valley I didn't recognize. "Where are we?" Chen asked. I checked my GPS unit, which had been useless underground. According to the coordinates, we were almost 3 miles from where we'd entered the cave system, on the opposite side of a ridge. Somehow we'd passed under an entire mountain. I managed to get a signal on my radio and called in our position. Search and rescue reached us 2 hours later. By then, Chen was feverish, his injured leg badly infected. They airlifted him to the hospital in Flagstaff while I gave my report to Harris. I told him about finding Chen and navigating out of the caves. But I left out the creature. Who would believe me? Even I was starting to doubt what I'd seen as the daylight, and the presence of other people made the whole experience seem dreamlike. 3 days later, I learned something disturbing. Chen wasn't the first hiker to go missing near Blackwater that month. Another man, Marcus Williams, had been found wandering along a forest road 2 weeks earlier, dehydrated and confused. He claimed to have been kept in a cave system by something he couldn't describe. I visited both men in the hospital. Chen was recovering from his infection, but something about him seemed changed. His eyes caught the light strangely, reflecting it like an animal's would. Marcus showed the same symptom. Plus, he'd developed unusual patches of thick hair on his back and shoulders, which the doctors were attributing to some kind of stress response. Both men described dreams of running through forests on 4 legs. Both had elevated body temperatures and heightened senses of smell and hearing that the doctors couldn't explain. I didn't tell anyone, but I'd been having similar dreams myself since the cave incident. And twice, I'd caught my own eyes reflecting strangely in the mirror. I returned to Blackwater alone a week later. I knew it was dangerous, but something was pulling me back there. I followed a different approach this time, tracking what looked like large paw prints up an unused game trail. The trail led to a hidden valley I'd never seen on any park map, and there, in the fading light of dusk, I saw them, at least a dozen creatures like the one from the cave, moving about what looked like a small settlement of caves and crude shelters. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt a strange sense of recognition, like I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for. One of the creatures, larger than the others, with silver fur mingled with the black, approached me. It made no threatening moves, just studied me with those intelligent amber eyes. And then I heard a voice in my head, not spoken aloud, but clear as day. "You have returned, Threshold Walker." I didn't speak, but somehow it heard my thoughts. What are you? We are the forgotten ones, neither fully of your world nor fully separate from it. It explained, in concepts more than words, that they were ancient beings who had once been numerous across these lands. They were neither fully animal nor fully human, but something in between, guardians of the boundaries between worlds. Those with certain bloodlines can become vessels for our knowledge, our existence. We are dying out. We need new blood. With growing horror, I realized what was happening to Chen and Marcus and what might be happening to me. You're changing them? The change comes naturally to those who are compatible. Those who fight it die, as their bodies reject the transformation. Your friend with the picture maker is fighting it. He may not survive. And me? I asked, though I already knew. Your blood remembers us. Your grandmother's people knew us. You have already begun the change, though you do not yet see it. Your dreams tell you this. The creature, I couldn't think of a better word for it, showed me images of others who had undergone this transformation. Some lived double lives, appearing human, but carrying the ability to shift into something else. Others had gone mad from the change, unable to reconcile the two worlds. Then it showed me something else, a ritual, ancient and powerful, that could draw the change out of someone not ready to accept it. You can save your friend with the picture maker, it told me, but the power must go somewhere. It must be contained in another vessel. In me, I realized. You are already changing. You would simply take on more of what is already within you, become more fully a threshold walker, one who bridges our world and yours. I returned to the hospital that night and performed the ritual as I'd been shown. I won't describe it here. Some things shouldn't be shared. But it worked. By morning, Chen's eyes had lost their strange reflective quality, and his fever had broken. The doctors called it a miraculous recovery. As for me, well, I'm still a park ranger. I still patrol my assigned areas, file my reports, and do my job. To anyone looking at me, I appear normal, but I'm not the same person who entered that cave system. My senses are sharper now. I can smell a hiker's campfire from miles away. I can hear conversations from impossible distances. And at night, sometimes, when the moon is bright and the forest calls to me, I run on 4 legs instead of 2. I've returned to the hidden valley many times. I'm learning from them, about their history, their purpose, their ways. They've been here since before humans built their first cities, watching, protecting the sacred places from those who would defile them. I haven't told anyone about this. Who would believe me? But sometimes I wonder about others like me out there, other threshold walkers guarding the boundaries between worlds, standing between humanity and forces they don't understand and aren't ready to face. I still have my debts. I still grieve my parents. But I've found a purpose I never expected, a legacy from my grandmother's blood that I never knew was mine to claim. And sometimes, when hikers stray too close to certain boundaries in my forest, they might glimpse something moving in the shadows, something that herds them gently back to safer trails, something that watches with amber eyes to ensure they don't cross thresholds they aren't prepared to understand. If you're ever hiking in northern Arizona and feel like something's watching you from the tree line, something that's neither fully animal nor human, you might be right. But don't be afraid. We're not here to hurt you. We're just making sure you stay on the right side of the threshold. I never wanted to be a park ranger. Not really. But when Dad died 3 years ago, the medical bills nearly broke us. I came back to Arizona from college in Flagstaff with no degree and a mountain of debt. My grandmother, my Shimasani, was the one who suggested I apply for the ranger position at White Canyon Wilderness. "You're a Nahalai," she told me, using the old Navajo word. "A tracker, the land speaks to you." I'd rolled my eyes then. I was only a quarter Navajo, and I'd never much believed in that spiritual stuff. I know better now. They call it Sabio and Ziskai in the old language. I won't translate that. Some words shouldn't be spoken casually. The canyon cuts deep into the earth, like a wound that never healed. The tourists love it for the hiking trails and the views, but the locals know to respect it, to fear it even. Last Thursday started like any other day. I woke up in my small cabin near the ranger station, made some coffee, and checked my messages. There was an alert about a missing hiker, some anthropology grad student named Kyle Bennett who'd gone off trail the day before. His friends reported him missing when he didn't return to their campsite. The alert said he'd mentioned heading toward the Kachina Caves area to gather research for his thesis on local folklore. I remember sighing when I read that. The Kachina Caves are technically off-limits, not just because they're dangerous, but because they're culturally significant to the tribe. But that doesn't stop people from trying to find them. I grabbed my pack, my radio, first aid kit, extra water, and my tracking gear. As I got into my truck, I felt this weird heaviness in the air, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear blue. My grandmother would have said it was a sign. I just thought it meant we might get rain later. The drive to the northern trailhead took about 40 minutes. The search area was huge, miles of rugged terrain with steep drops, hidden ravines, and dense pine forest. I started where Kyle was last seen, looking for any signs of his passage. I've always been good at this part. Dad used to take me hunting when I was a kid, teaching me how to spot broken twigs, disturbed soil, the way grass bends when someone walks through it. About 2 hours in, I found Kyle's first tracks, the distinct waffle pattern of his hiking boots pressed into a patch of soft earth. He'd veered off the main trail, heading north toward higher elevation. Not toward the caves at all, which was strange given what his friends had reported. I followed his trail for another mile, the signs getting fresher. He'd been moving quickly at first, but then his stride pattern changed. The footprints got closer together, less even. He'd started limping. Then I saw something that made me stop cold. Beside Kyle's tracks was another set of prints. Huge prints. At first I thought maybe a bear, but no. These were bipedal. 2 feet, walking upright, with 5 distinct toe impressions. Each print was easily 17 inches long and 8 inches wide. Whatever made them was massive, and it had been following Kyle. My heart started pounding. I'm not easily spooked. You can't be and work alone in the wilderness, but something about those prints felt wrong. They were too big for any animal that should be in these mountains. And they moved with purpose, tracking the hiker with obvious intelligence. I radioed back to base, but kept it professional. Just reported that I'd found the missing hiker's trail and was pursuing it. I didn't mention the other tracks. They'd think I was crazy. The trail led me up toward a rocky ridge. The hiker's prints showed he was definitely injured now, dragging his right foot, occasionally using his hands to steady himself against trees. The other tracks stayed with him, sometimes disappearing on hard ground, then reappearing, always following. I rounded a bend and froze. About 50 yards ahead, standing perfectly still against the tree line, was something. My brain couldn't process it at first. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and covered in dark hair or fur. It stood upright like a human but was broader, more massive through the shoulders and chest. I couldn't make out its face clearly, but I could feel it watching me. My hand went to my sidearm automatically. Rangers carry guns for protection against wildlife, not whatever this was. For 3 heartbeats, we just stared at each other. Then it turned and moved into the trees with shocking speed for something so large. I should have called it in then. Should have reported a possible predator in the area. But what would I say? That I'd seen some kind of giant, hairy humanoid? They'd think I was hallucinating from heat exhaustion. So I kept going, following both sets of tracks now, moving faster. Kyle's prints showed he'd started running at some point, which was the worst thing he could have done if he was already injured. About a half-mile later, I spotted a small emergency shelter, one of the basic wooden structures we maintain throughout the park for hikers caught in sudden weather. The door was partially open. "Hello? Park service!" I called out, hand still on my weapon. "In here, please, help me!" The voice was male, panicked and exhausted. I entered cautiously. A young man with a scruffy beard and wire-rimmed glasses was sitting against the far wall, his right ankle swollen to twice its normal size. Relief washed over his face when he saw my uniform. "Thank God," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought it was coming back." "Kyle Bennett?" I asked, already kneeling to examine his ankle. He nodded, wincing as I gently probed the injury. "Severe sprain, maybe a fracture," I told him, pulling out my first aid kit. "What happened? Your friends said you were heading to the caves." Kyle's eyes darted nervously to the door. "I was, but then I saw it and I ran." "Saw what?" I asked, though I already knew. "You won't believe me," he said. "No one will, but it was watching me from the trees. At first I thought it was a bear, but it stood up." He shuddered. "I've been researching the Mogollon monster for my thesis, Arizona's version of Bigfoot, but I never expected." I finished wrapping his ankle and handed him some water and pain relievers. "Did it chase you?" Kyle's eyes widened. "You believe me?" I hesitated. "I saw tracks, big ones, and maybe something else." "It didn't exactly chase me," he said, lowering his voice. "It was more like it was herding me. It would appear ahead of me, forcing me to change direction. It kept driving me north, away from the trail. Every time I tried to circle back toward the main path, it would be there, blocking me." That sent a chill down my spine. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just randomly terrorizing a hiker. It had a purpose. "We need to get you out of here," I said, helping him up. "Can you put any weight on that foot?" He tried and grimaced, a little, with help. I radioed base again, reporting that I'd found the missing hiker with an ankle injury. I requested extraction, but was told the nearest team was at least 3 hours out. We'd have to start making our way down ourselves, and they'd meet us on the trail. As I helped Kyle gather his things, we both froze at the same moment. A heavy silence had fallen outside. No birds, no insects, nothing. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A low, rumbling breath, like air moving through a cavern just outside the shelter wall. Something massive pressed against the structure, making the whole building creak. Kyle clutched my arm so hard it hurt. The wall beside us suddenly bowed inward as something powerful pushed against it. The wooden planks splintered, and through the crack, I saw it, a massive, hair-covered arm ending in a hand with fingers that looked disturbingly human, but larger and tipped with thick, curved nails. "Run!" I yelled, yanking Kyle toward the door. We burst outside, and I half-carried him as we scrambled away from the shelter. Behind us, the wall collapsed as the creature tore through it like it was made of paper. I glanced back once and instantly regretted it. The thing was fully visible now in the daylight, at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur with patches of gray at its chest and face. Its features were a horrifying blend of human and something older, more primal. Its eyes, though, God, its eyes were intelligent, aware, calculating. I'm trained for emergency situations. I know the protocols for predator encounters, but nothing prepared me for this. With Kyle hobbling beside me, there was no way we could outrun it. I scanned our surroundings desperately and spotted a narrow opening in the rocky hillside about 30 yards ahead. The entrance to one of the countless small caves that honeycomb these mountains. "There!" I pointed, already changing course. "No!" Kyle gasped as I dragged him forward. "The caves! We'll be trapped!" He was right, but we had no choice. The creature was gaining on us, moving with shocking speed for something so large. My grandmother's warnings echoed in my head, never enter the dark places in the earth. The tribe believes that's where the old ones dwell, the beings that were here before us. I've never been so terrified as I was when we ducked into that narrow opening, scraping our shoulders on the rough stone. The passage twisted sharply to the left, then opened into a larger chamber. Pale light filtered in from some unseen opening above, enough for us to see that we were in a natural tunnel that continued deeper into the mountain. We heard it before we saw it, the sound of the creature forcing its massive frame into the cave entrance. It shouldn't have been possible. The opening was barely wide enough for us, but somehow it was coming, the sound of its body scraping against stone sending shivers down my spine. "Keep moving," I whispered, helping Kyle deeper into the tunnel. "There has to be another way out." The tunnel narrowed again, forcing us to crouch. Kyle's breathing was ragged from pain and fear. My flashlight beam showed that the passage continued downward, spiraling into the earth. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but the sounds of pursuit kept us moving forward. We came to a junction where the tunnel split in 3 directions. I shone my light down each one, trying to decide. "Which way?" Kyle gasped. Before I could answer, we heard a terrible scraping sound from behind us. The creature was still coming, somehow contorting its massive body to fit through passages that should have been impossible for it. It moved with an unnatural flexibility, as though its bones could bend and reshape. I chose the middle tunnel, which seemed to slope upward slightly. As we moved through it, my light caught something on the wall that made me pause despite our danger. Pictographs, ancient paintings in red ochre and black. They showed small human figures and beside them, tall, elongated beings with massive limbs. The images were weathered, centuries old at least. Kyle saw them too. "Oh my God," he whispered. "They've known about these things for centuries." The sound of pursuit grew louder, forcing us onward. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber with a surprise, a small underground river cutting across our path, maybe 15 feet wide and flowing quickly. "We have to cross," I said, already helping Kyle toward the water's edge. "It might throw off our scent." "I can't swim with this ankle," Kyle said, panic rising in his voice. "I'll help you. Just hold on to me." The water was shockingly cold and moved faster than I expected. Kyle clung to me as I pulled us across, fighting the current. By the time we reached the other side, we were both soaked and shivering. The chamber continued on the other side, opening into what appeared to be a larger space ahead. As we staggered forward, the tunnel suddenly opened into a vast cavern, unlike anything I'd seen before. This wasn't a natural formation. The walls were too smooth, the space too deliberately shaped. In the center stood a stone altar, stained dark with what could only be centuries of dried blood. Around the walls were more pictographs, elaborate scenes showing tall beings receiving offerings from human figures. "This is a ceremonial chamber," Kyle whispered, his academic interest momentarily overriding his fear. Some kind of ritual site. I didn't care what it was. I just wanted to find a way out. I spotted a shaft of daylight coming from high above, an opening maybe 20 feet up one wall where the cavern ceiling had partially collapsed. There, I pointed. If we can climb up. A thunderous sound stopped us cold. The creature had entered the chamber behind us, its massive frame filling the tunnel entrance. In the dimness, its eyes caught the light from my flashlight, reflecting back with an eerie amber glow. For a long, terrible moment, it just stood there watching us. Then it began to move forward, not charging but approaching with deliberate, almost ceremonial steps. "It's hurting us again," Kyle whispered. "It wanted us here." I drew my gun, though some deep instinct told me it would be useless. "Stay behind me," I told Kyle. "When I create a distraction, try to make it to that rock formation under the opening. You might be able to climb out." The creature stopped at the edge of the underground river, watching us intently. Then it did something I still can't explain. It reached into a pouch-like fold of its fur and removed something wrapped in what looked like ancient hide. With deliberate movements, it placed this bundle on the stone altar, then stepped back, those intelligent eyes never leaving us. "It's making an offering," Kyle said, his voice barely audible. My grandmother's stories came flooding back, tales of the ancient agreements between her people and the original beings of the land, agreements that had been forgotten or dismissed as superstition. A sudden clarity hit me. "It's an exchange," I said. "You for this." I nodded toward the bundle. Kyle's eyes widened. "What? You were researching the legends. You went looking for its territory, but instead of killing you, it's following the old ways. An exchange." The creature made a low, rumbling sound that wasn't quite language, but conveyed clear meaning. It stepped away from the altar, gesturing toward the bundle with one massive hand. "I'm going to help you get out of here," I told Kyle. "Get to those rocks and start climbing. I'll boost you up." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. Go." As Kyle hobbled toward the rock formation, I kept my eyes on the creature, moving slowly toward the altar. When I reached it, I carefully picked up the bundle. It was surprisingly heavy, wrapped in what felt like ancient leather, tied with sinew cord. I tucked it into my pack without opening it. The creature watched, then gave a single, deliberate nod. I backed away, keeping my eyes on it, then turned to help Kyle. With my boost, he managed to scramble up the rocks toward the opening, despite his injured ankle. When he reached the hole, sunlight illuminated his relieved face. "Come on," he called down. I started to climb, but paused and looked back. The creature remained motionless by the altar, watching. Something about its posture conveyed not menace, but expectation. "I understand," I said, not sure if it comprehended my words, but certain it understood my meaning. "I'll make sure people respect the boundaries." It made that rumbling sound again, then turned and moved back toward the tunnel with the same deliberate pace. I climbed as fast as I could, pulling myself up beside Kyle into blessed daylight. We emerged on a steep hillside about a half-mile from where we'd entered the cave. The rescue team found us 2 hours later, making our slow way down the mountain. I never mentioned the creature in my official report, just said we got lost in the cave system trying to escape a mountain lion. Kyle gave me a long look when I told this story, but didn't contradict me. After we got back to civilization and Kyle was taken to the hospital, I visited my grandmother's brother, Benjamin Sosi. He's an elder in the tribe, one of the few who still knows the old stories. I told him everything. He wasn't surprised. "The guardians of the deep places," he said, nodding. "They were here before us. When our people came, agreements were made, boundaries established." But no one maintains those boundaries anymore, I said. No, he agreed sadly. The old markers have fallen. The warnings go unheeded. The young people don't believe, and the old ones are dying. He examined the bundle I'd brought. Inside was a stone tablet covered in markings I couldn't read, along with a necklace made of strange teeth and bones. It chose you, Benjamin said, to be a boundary walker, one who understands both worlds. I didn't want this responsibility. I became a ranger to pay off debts, not to become some kind of mystical guardian. But I can't unsee what I saw, can't unfeel that primal certainty that the creature could have killed us both easily, but chose instead to follow ancient protocols that humans have forgotten. That was 5 days ago. I'm still a ranger, still patrol the same wilderness, but now I watch for different signs. Benjamin has been teaching me the old markers, the symbols that should be maintained at certain boundaries. I've started restoring them quietly during my regular patrols. I've seen the creature twice more since then, always at a distance, watching me work, making sure I understand my part of the bargain. I don't know what would happen if the boundaries failed completely, if too many people pushed into places they're not meant to go. But I have a feeling the next human who encounters these beings might not be offered an exchange. Sometimes I wake up at night hearing that deep, rumbling breath outside my cabin window. Not threatening, reminding. I'm a boundary walker now, a keeper of an agreement most of humanity has forgotten. And I can never tell anyone the whole truth about what lives in the deep places of the White Canyon wilderness. I guess I should start with why I even took the job in Saya Canyon National Forest in the first place. My dad died last March after fighting pancreatic cancer for almost 2 years. The insurance covered some stuff, but not nearly enough. By the end, I was $300,000 in debt from his medical bills. I couldn't even grieve properly because collection agencies started calling within weeks. I needed to get away from everything and needed money fast. When the Forest Service posted the Winter Ranger position at the Northern Outpost, I jumped at it. Double pay for winter isolation duty, housing included, and far away from everything I needed to escape. My background in environmental science and forest management made me qualified, plus I'd spent summers as a junior ranger in my teens. The posting warned about extended periods of isolation and challenging winter conditions, but that was exactly what I wanted. I've always gone by Kachina, though it's not my birth name. My grandmother was Hopi, and I spent a lot of time with her growing up, learning about the spiritual traditions. When I was 19, I formally adopted the name after spending a summer studying with Hopi elders. It felt right to embrace that part of my heritage, especially since my grandmother always said I had the old site, whatever that means. Cabin 7 sits against a canyon wall, overlooking miles of wilderness with the sacred mountains visible in the distance. When I arrived in early November, the first snow had just fallen, outlining the pine trees in white. The cabin is sturdy, built in the 1960s with thick logs and a tin roof. It has a main room with a wood stove, a small kitchen area, a bathroom with an actual shower, thank God, and a bedroom. Solar panels with battery backup provide electricity, and there's a satellite phone for emergencies. My nearest neighbor is 17 miles away at the southern outpost. The first month was actually peaceful. I did my patrols, documented wildlife activity, checked in with headquarters weekly, and spent evenings reading or sketching by the fire. I started feeling like I could breathe again for the first time since Dad got sick. But then things started getting weird. It began with tracks I couldn't identify. I have tracking experience. I know what bear, mountain lion, elk, and deer tracks look like in all conditions. These were different, wider and deeper than human prints, with strange toe formations, almost like a human foot but with elongated toes and an unusual gait pattern. They would appear overnight, sometimes circling my cabin, then disappear into the forest. Then I noticed the trees, branches twisted into unnatural patterns, some broken at heights no human could reach without equipment. I'd find small clusters of stones arranged in geometric patterns that were definitely not natural. Once I found a deer carcass carefully placed in a clearing, organs removed with surgical precision and arranged around the body. No animal predator does that. The vocalizations started in December. At first I thought it was the wind, then maybe coyotes or wolves. But it wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. A low, rhythmic series of calls that almost sounded like words in a language I couldn't understand. They always came at night, always from different directions, as if whatever made them was circling my location. I reported some of this to headquarters, but kept the stranger details to myself. I didn't want them thinking I was losing it from isolation. They suggested it might be locals messing with the new ranger, maybe hunters operating illegally in the area. They promised to send someone to check it out after the next supply run, but that was still 3 weeks away. The morning everything changed. I woke to find fresh tracks circling my cabin, those same unidentifiable prints, but this time they led directly to my front door. On my porch was a small arrangement of bones forming a symbol I'd never seen before. The bones were clean, bleached white, arranged with obvious intention. I took photos and was about to call it in when the emergency line rang. A hiker named Marcus Delaney had been reported missing by his girlfriend. He'd come into the forest 5 days earlier, telling her he was looking for evidence of the Arizona Sasquatch. She hadn't heard from him since his check-in 3 days ago. His last known location was near Shadow Creek, about 8 miles from my cabin. I grabbed my pack with emergency supplies, first aid kit, GPS, and extra clothing. The temperature was dropping, and another storm was forecast for that night. If this guy was still alive, he wouldn't last another day in the coming weather. The hike to his last known location took 4 hours. Fresh snow had fallen the night before, making tracking difficult, but I eventually found his campsite near the creek. What I saw made my blood run cold. His tent was destroyed, not torn up like an animal would do, but methodically taken apart. The poles were snapped and arranged in a strange pattern on the ground. His supplies were scattered across the snow in what looked like deliberate placement, and there was blood, not a lot, but enough to see it speckling the snow around the camp. I took photos and logged GPS coordinates as I was trained to do. That's when I saw it, a massive shadow moving between the trees across the creek. I froze, my hand on my bear spray. Whatever it was stood at least 8 feet tall with impossibly broad shoulders. It moved with a strange fluidity, like nothing I'd ever seen before. For a brief moment, it turned in my direction, and though I couldn't make out its face, I felt it looking right at me. Then it was gone. No sound, no branches breaking, just gone. I radioed in what I'd found, but downplayed the sighting. I said I'd spotted large wildlife, possibly a bear, near the destroyed camp. Headquarters instructed me to continue searching for the missing hiker, but to be careful and return to the cabin before nightfall. The storm hit sooner than forecast. Within an hour, visibility dropped to almost nothing as snow fell in thick sheets. The temperature plummeted, and I knew I wouldn't make it back to my cabin before dark. There was an emergency shelter about 2 miles from my location, little more than a reinforced shack with basic supplies, but it would keep me alive through the night. I was about half a mile from the shelter when I heard something moving through the forest parallel to my path. Something big, keeping pace with me, but staying just out of sight. Every few minutes, I'd catch glimpses of a dark shape moving between trees. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about stealth or tracking. I reached the emergency shelter just as daylight was fading completely. I fumbled with the padlock, hands shaking from cold and fear, and finally got inside. The shelter was basic: 4 walls, a small wood stove, some emergency rations, and 2 cots. I barricaded the door with one of the cots and got a fire going in the wood stove. That's when I heard moaning from the far corner of the shelter. I nearly jumped out of my skin, swinging my flashlight toward the sound. There, huddled under a thin emergency blanket, was a man, presumably Marcus. His face was pale, lips blue-tinged. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, with bone visibly protruding through his torn pants, compound fracture and hypothermia. I don't know how he made it to the shelter in that condition. I rushed to help him, giving him water and painkillers from my kit. As I worked to stabilize his leg, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "It followed me," he whispered, eyes wide with terror. "For 3 days, hunting me, playing with me. It's not what people think. It's not a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. It's something else, something older." I tried to calm him down, thinking he was delirious from pain and cold. "You're safe now. We'll radio for extraction once the storm passes." He shook his head violently. "No, we're not safe. It can change shape. I saw it squeeze through spaces no animal that size should fit through. Like it can reshape itself. Bones that bend and reform." A heavy thud against the outer wall of the shelter interrupted him. Then another. Something was circling the shelter, testing its structure. Marcus began to hyperventilate, his eyes fixed on the ceiling as it creaked under the weight of something moving across the roof. "It found us," he whispered. For hours we sat in terrified silence as the thing circled and tested the shelter. Occasionally it would scrape against the walls or thump heavily on the roof. Around midnight everything went quiet. Too quiet. Even the howling wind seemed to die down. Then came the sound of wood splintering as something began breaking through the back wall of the shelter. "We have to go," I said, grabbing my pack and helping Marcus to his feet. He screamed in pain as I forced him up, but adrenaline took over and he managed to hobble with my support. The wall began to bulge inward, wood cracking. I saw long, gnarled fingers prying at the boards. We stumbled out the door into the blizzard. The cold hit like a physical force, but fear pushed us forward. I had no real plan except to put distance between us and the shelter. About half a mile away, I spotted the entrance to a cave system I'd documented during my earlier patrols. It wasn't on my original maps, but I'd reported it to headquarters in my weekly updates. It seemed like our only option. We staggered into the cave entrance just as I heard a tremendous crash behind us, the sound of the shelter being torn apart. The cave was cold but blocked the wind. I helped Marcus deeper inside, using my flashlight to navigate. The passage narrowed, then opened into a larger chamber. What I saw there stopped me in my tracks. The walls were covered in ancient pictographs, images of tall beings with elongated limbs interacting with human figures. Some depicted hunts, others showed what looked like ceremonies with humans presenting offerings to the tall beings. Marcus saw them too. "The old stories," he whispered, "the ones the tribes don't share with outsiders." A sound from the cave entrance snapped us back to reality. Something large was moving into the cave. We pushed deeper into the system, through passages that grew increasingly narrow. Some were so tight I had to exhale completely to squeeze through. I don't know how Marcus managed with his broken leg, but fear is a powerful motivator. We came to a section where the passage was barely 18 inches wide. No way something as large as what I'd seen could follow us through there. We paused to catch our breath, and that's when I heard it. A wet, cracking sound like bones breaking and reforming. Then something began squeezing into the narrow passage behind us. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw a mass of matted hair and elongated limbs, contorting impossibly to fit through the space. It shouldn't have been able to do that. Nothing that size should be able to do that. We fled deeper, eventually reaching a chamber with an underground river. The water was frigid, but it was our only path forward. We waded in, the current nearly knocking us over. Marcus passed out from pain and cold, and I had to drag him through the water to the other side. The chamber we emerged in was different from the others. It appeared to be a ceremonial space, with a stone altar in the center. The altar was stained dark with what could only be ancient blood. The walls were covered in more elaborate pictographs, showing the tall beings receiving offerings. I propped Marcus against the wall and looked for another way out. There was a narrow air shaft leading up toward the surface, our only chance. As I was figuring out how we might climb it, I felt a change in the air. The creature had found us. It stepped into the chamber, its full form visible in the beam of my flashlight. It stood over 9 feet tall, its body covered in matted hair that wasn't quite fur and wasn't quite hair. Its face was both animal and human, yet neither. Its limbs were too long, joints bending in extra places they shouldn't. But what struck me most were its eyes. Ancient, intelligent, aware. This wasn't a beast. It understood exactly what it was doing. I stood frozen, certain we were about to die. But instead of attacking, it placed something on the altar, a small bundle wrapped in what looked like animal hide. It then stepped back, watching me expectantly. In that moment, I remembered my grandmother's teachings about respect and exchange, about the old agreements between the first peoples and the beings that preceded them. With shaking hands, I removed the emergency medical kit from my pack and placed it on the altar next to the bundle. The creature made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite speech, and nodded slowly. It backed away, disappearing into the shadows of the chamber. The path to the air shaft was clear. I don't remember much about getting Marcus up that shaft. Pure adrenaline, I guess. We emerged about half a mile from the original cave entrance just as dawn was breaking. The storm had passed, leaving a crystal clear morning. I managed to get a signal on my radio and called for emergency extraction. Within hours, a rescue helicopter located us and airlifted Marcus to the hospital in Flagstaff. I told them we got caught in the storm and took shelter in a cave. I mentioned nothing about what hunted us. It's been 3 weeks now. I'm still at cabin 7, still doing my ranger duties. Marcus recovered and gave a statement saying he fell while hiking and managed to find the emergency shelter before I discovered him. He never mentioned the creature. When I visited him in the hospital, he just said, "Some things aren't meant to be shared. They wouldn't believe us anyway." He's right. Who would believe what we experienced? That there are ancient beings in these mountains that have existed alongside humans for thousands of years? That they have rules and expectations about how we interact with their territory? I've seen the tracks circle my cabin several more times, but they never come as close as before. Sometimes I find small arrangements of stones or bones left on my porch, not threatening, more like acknowledgments. I've taken to leaving small offerings in return, pouches of tobacco, beads, or food. My grandmother always said the old stories weren't just stories, that humans have never been alone in these places, that some boundaries are meant to be respected rather than crossed. I understand now what she meant when she said I had the old sight. I can see the truth that most people miss, that this forest isn't just wilderness to be mapped and managed. It's a shared territory with rules older than any human law. I don't know what was in the bundle the creature left on the altar. I didn't take it, and I didn't open it. Some exchanges aren't about the item itself, but about the recognition of boundaries. I've decided to extend my contract at Say Canyon. Someone needs to be here who understands what's really happening, who can maintain the balance. I'm not just protecting the wilderness from human impact anymore. I'm helping maintain an ancient agreement between worlds that share this landscape. My debt collectors still call sometimes. The money still matters, but it doesn't seem as important now. When you've seen what I've seen, your priorities shift. I haven't told anyone else about this. You're the first. I don't expect you to believe me, but if you ever find yourself in remote wilderness and feel eyes watching from between the trees, if you hear vocalizations that sound almost like words in a language too old to understand, remember, you're not the first human to walk those paths, and the beings that came before us are still there, watching and waiting for us to remember the old agreements. Show proper respect, leave an offering, and never ever assume you're alone in the wilderness. I've been sitting on this experience for months, not sure if I should share it. Even now, typing this makes my hands shake, but I need to get it out there. Maybe someone can make sense of what happened to me up in Denali. I'm a Hanu, I'm Athabascan, though I didn't grow up with much connection to my heritage. Just a name my mother insisted on, and some stories from my grandfather that I mostly ignored as a kid. After graduating with a forestry degree and staring down $87,000 in student loans, I jumped at the chance to work as a park ranger at Denali National Park. The pay wasn't great, but the position came with housing, a remote cabin on the wilderness boundary that would let me save almost everything I earned. When I arrived for orientation, I noticed something off about how people reacted when I mentioned my posting. Ranger Merrill, my supervisor, a weathered man in his 50s with this permanent squint like he was always staring into the sun, just nodded and said, "Cabin 8, good spot. Anderson left in a hurry. You'll need to clean up a bit." I asked what happened to Anderson, and Merrill's face went blank. "Family emergency," he said, but wouldn't look me in the eye. Another ranger nearby suddenly found something fascinating to examine on her clipboard. The cabin was unsettling when I first arrived. Not just the mess, clothes left behind, half-eaten canned beans fossilized on the counter, but the feeling. It was like walking into a room where people had just been arguing. An emotional residue hung in the air. But the view was unbeatable. Miles of untouched wilderness, mountains cutting into the sky like teeth. I told myself I'd scored the best posting in the park. For 3 months, everything was normal. I patrolled my section, helped lost hikers, documented wildlife sightings. I got used to the isolation. The nearest ranger was 6 miles away, and the visitor center was a 45-minute drive. I liked it that way. Then yesterday happened. I still can't believe it was just yesterday. It feels like weeks have passed. I was checking the northern trail markers when I noticed tracks crossing the maintained path. Wolf prints, not unusual for the area, but as I followed them out of professional curiosity, something changed. The prints began to elongate. The stride lengthened. About 50 yards in, they weren't wolf tracks anymore. They looked half-human, like someone had taken a wolf paw and stretched it into a human foot with 2 long toes still ending in claw points. My first thought was a bear walking on its hind legs, but these weren't bear tracks, not by a long shot. I took photos with my phone and radioed Merrill. "Tracks out by marker 22, I told him. "Never seen anything like them. Wolf transitioning to something else." There was a long pause before he responded. "Send me the photos. Don't follow the tracks any further." His tone made me uneasy. This wasn't standard procedure for an unusual wildlife sighting. We're supposed to document and identify. I sent the photos and waited for his response, but my radio remained silent. When he finally called back an hour later, his voice was tight. "Those are just degraded wolf tracks. Rain probably distorted them." It hadn't rained in over a week, and these weren't degraded. They were a clear transformation from one thing to another. But I didn't argue. Something in his voice told me to drop it. I headed back to the cabin as the sun was setting. The woods felt different. I've never been the jumpy type. I've encountered moose, bears, and wolves without getting rattled. But that evening, every snapping twig made me spin around. Nothing was there, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Back at the cabin, I tried to distract myself by making dinner and filling out reports. Around 11 p.m., I was getting ready for bed when I heard it, scratching at my door. Not the random brush of a branch or an animal investigating. This was deliberate. 3 slow scratches, pause, 3 more. "Hello?" I called out, grabbing my flashlight and bear spray. No response, just more scratching. I checked the windows, but couldn't see anything in the darkness. Eventually, the scratching stopped. I told myself it was probably a curious animal and tried to sleep, but kept jerking awake at every sound. At first light, I cautiously opened the door. No animal tracks, but something had been there. In the dirt by my front step was a crude drawing, a stick figure with elongated limbs and what looked like a wolf's head. It wasn't scratched into the dirt. It was pressed in, like someone had used their fingers. I didn't have time to think about it because my radio crackled to life. A hiker was missing. Sarah Keller, 28, solo backpacker who hadn't checked in at her designated waypoint. She was last seen heading into my area. I joined the search immediately. 3 hours into the search, I found her backpack, not on the ground, not snagged on a bush, but deliberately placed about 15 feet up in a pine tree. The branches weren't broken. Someone had climbed up and balanced it in the crook of a limb. Inside was her phone, water, energy bars, all the essentials no hiker would willingly abandon. 100 yards ahead, on a flat rock, I found a single hiking boot, just sitting there, placed deliberately, laces neatly tied. I radioed it in, and Merrill said he was sending backup, but I was at least an hour from the nearest searcher. That's when I saw her, a figure standing between the trees about 50 yards away. From that distance, she matched Sarah's description. Medium height, dark ponytail, red jacket. But something was wrong with her silhouette. It seemed to waver, like heat distortion on asphalt. "Sarah?" I called out. "Sarah Keller? I'm a park ranger. Are you hurt?" The figure didn't move. I approached slowly, talking calmly like we're trained to do with distressed hikers. When I got within 20 feet, she turned. God, her face. It was like looking at one of those AI-generated images where everything is almost right, but fundamentally wrong. Her features were Sarah's. I recognized her from the photo in the missing persons report, but they were arranged wrong. Her eyes were too far apart. Her smile was too wide, extending farther than a human mouth should be able to stretch. And her teeth, Jesus, too many, too sharp. "Help me," she said, but her mouth didn't move in sync with the words. It was like watching a badly dubbed movie. I stopped. "Sarah, I need you to stay right there. More rangers are coming." That's when she smiled wider, impossibly wide, and I saw that her teeth were not human teeth at all. They were like needles, row after row of them visible as her cheeks somehow split farther than any human face could allow. She moved, not running like a person runs, but like someone who'd only seen running in a flipbook animation. Herky-jerky, too fast, all wrong. She went on all fours for a moment, then upright, then bent at impossible angles as she disappeared into the trees. I stood there, unable to move, my radio forgotten in my hand. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't anything I could explain. My radio startled me back to reality. It was Merrill. "Ahanu, get back to base, now. I found Sarah's gear and I think I saw her, but something's wrong. Sarah Keller just walked into the visitor center. Get back here now." My blood went cold. If Sarah was at the visitor center, what the hell had I just seen? I made it back to the ranger station in record time. Sarah was there, wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot chocolate. She looked normal, tired, dirty from a night outdoors, but human, normal. Except for the strange marks around her ankle, a perfect circle of what looked like puncture wounds. Merrill pulled me aside while the medical team checked her out. "What exactly did you see out there?" he asked, his voice low. I told him. All of it. The figure, the wrong face, the teeth, the way it moved. I expected him to think I was crazy, but he just got paler. "Listen to me very carefully," he said. "Go back to your cabin. Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in. Not me, not another ranger, not a lost hiker. No one. Not until morning, no matter what you hear." "What's going on? What did I see out there?" He looked over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "My grandmother was Diné, Navajo. She had stories about things that can look like people but aren't. Skinwalkers. I didn't believe it until I came to Denali. There's something in these woods, Ahanu. Something old. That's what happened to Anderson, isn't it? The ranger before me." Merrill didn't answer directly. "Just get to your cabin. Bar the door. Don't let anyone in." I wanted to argue, to demand real answers, but the look in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't a man spinning tall tales. This was a man terrified of something he couldn't explain. I drove back to my cabin as the sun was setting, checking my mirrors constantly. Nothing followed me that I could see. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the knob, and loaded my personal shotgun, technically against regulations to have in park housing, but I grew up hunting and never went anywhere remote without it. For hours, nothing happened. I began to feel ridiculous, sitting there with a loaded shotgun, jumping at the sound of the old cabin settling. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard a voice outside. "Ahanu, are you awake? I need help." It was Sarah's voice. I stayed silent. "My ankle hurts. I think something bit me. Please, I can see your light on." I turned off the lamp. The voice continued. "Why won't you help me? Isn't that your job, Ranger?" Then the voice changed. It was Merrill now. "Ahanu, it's safe. We've secured the area. Open up." I clutched the shotgun tighter, remembering his warning. "Don't let anyone in, no matter what you hear." The voice kept changing. Another ranger I knew, then my mother's voice, though she's been dead for 5 years. Each one sounded perfect at first, then would distort slightly, like a tape being stretched. Then I heard my own voice. "Let me in. Let me in. I'm cold out here." Something scratched at each window, moving around the cabin. I heard footsteps on the roof. Not the scampering of a small animal, but heavy, deliberate steps that made the ceiling beams creak. I sat in the dark, shotgun pointed at the door, as the voices cycled through people I knew, begging to be let in. Sometimes the voice would glitch, repeating phrases like a broken record or speaking words backward. Near dawn, they stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the voices. I sat motionless, waiting. When daylight finally came, I cautiously looked out the windows. The ground around my cabin was covered in tracks. Some were animal, wolf, deer, even what looked like bear prints. But they all changed mid-track, morphing into twisted approximations of human footprints before changing into something else entirely. It was like whatever made them couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I radioed Merrill with shaking hands. They were here all night. "Stay there," he said. "I'm coming to get you." He arrived an hour later with 2 other rangers. They photographed the tracks, took samples of strange residue left on my door, a clear slime that smelled like rotting meat, and debated what to do. "We can't report this officially," one ranger argued. "They'll think we're insane." "We need to close this section of the park," Merrill insisted. "On what grounds? Unexplained footprints? Weird noises? The administration will never go for it without evidence." They were still arguing when we got a call about another missing hiker. As the closest ranger, I had to respond. Merrill didn't want me to go alone, but the other rangers were needed elsewhere. A child had gotten lost near the visitor center, and a small landslide had closed one of the main trails. "Take this," Merrill said, handing me a small leather pouch on a cord. "My grandmother made it. Protection." I felt ridiculous putting it around my neck, but I did it anyway. The pouch smelled of herbs and something metallic. The missing hiker was last seen near the same area where I'd found Sarah's backpack. I headed out, constantly scanning my surroundings. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, no birds, no small animals scurrying in the underbrush. About 2 miles in, I saw a figure ahead on the trail. From behind, it looked like me. Same ranger uniform, same build, but I was alone out here. "Hey!" I called out, raising my rifle. The figure turned. It had my face, almost. The eyes were black pits, the mouth a straight line with no lips. It wasn't wearing a ranger uniform after all, but something that looked like strips of wet leather sewn together. It spoke with my voice, but wrong, like someone trying to talk without knowing how a human mouth works. "Mine now. Your skin. Mine now." I fired a warning shot into the air. The thing didn't flinch. It took a step toward me, its movements jerky and wrong. I ran. I know park protocol. I know we're supposed to stand our ground with wildlife, to make ourselves big, to fight back against an attack. But this wasn't wildlife. This was something else. I sprinted back down the trail, constantly looking over my shoulder. The thing followed, moving in that same wrong way, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4, sometimes skittering sideways like a crab. Always my face watching me, but the expression all wrong. I made it to my truck and peeled out, radioing Merrill as I drove. "It's got my face. It's wearing my fucking face. Where are you?" His voice was tight with fear. "Heading back to base. It followed me, but I don't see it now." "No, don't come back here. It'll follow you. Go to higher ground. They don't like to climb above the tree line." I swerved, changing course for the mountain road that led to one of the observation points. The truck's tires squealed on the gravel as I pushed it faster than was safe on the winding road. In my rearview mirror, I saw movement in the trees. Not one figure, but several, all running with that same wrong gait. I couldn't make out details at that distance, but I knew they were the same type of creature. The road got steeper. and the trees thinned out. The figures fell behind, stopping at the edge of the tree line. I didn't slow down until I reached the observation point, a flat area with a small shelter for visitors to view the mountains. I got out, rifle ready, and watched the tree line. They were there, just inside the edge of the forest. 5 or 6 figures, some animal-like, some more human, all wrong in a way that made my eyes hurt to look at them. One stepped forward, the one with my face. It pointed at me, then made a slicing motion across its throat. My radio crackled. "Ahanu, you there?" It was Merrill. I'm at the observation point. They're watching me from the tree line. "Stay there. The old one can't get you there." "The old one? What the hell is going on, Merrill?" He was quiet for a moment. "It's been happening for decades. Rangers go missing. Hikers see things. We find pieces sometimes. The administration covers it up, calls them animal attacks, exposure deaths, disappearances in the wilderness. But it's the old one. It's been collecting skins." "What the fuck does that mean?" "It tries to become us. It wants to be human, but it can't get it right. So it takes our shapes, our voices, tries to learn by mimicking. The others are its children, I guess. Failed attempts." I looked down at the leather pouch he'd given me. "And this stops it?" "It helps. It confuses them, makes them see you as something else." I stayed at the observation point until sunset, watching the figures at the tree line. They never advanced, but they never left either. As darkness fell, more joined them, some looking like wolves with human hands, others like deer walking upright, still others like humans with parts in the wrong places. In the growing darkness, I saw something else emerge from the forest. Tall, at least 7 feet, and thin, with limbs that bent the wrong way. Its face was a blank oval of stretched skin with holes punched through for eyes and mouth. It walked to the front of the gathered creatures and stared up at me. The old one. It raised one elongated arm and pointed at me, then at itself. "Mine," it seemed to say, "you will be mine." The others began to move, spreading out around the base of the hill, cutting off any escape route. The pendant around my neck grew hot against my skin. My radio came to life again. "Ahanu, we're coming for you. Helicopter inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Just hold on." The old one tilted its head at the sound of the radio. Then it began to climb the hill, its movements spider-like. The others followed. The pendant burned against my chest now. I fired at the approaching creatures, but they didn't slow. Bullets meant nothing to them. I could hear the helicopter in the distance. The old one was 50 yards away now, close enough that I could see the seams in its skin, literal seams, like it was sewn together from pieces. "Stay back," I shouted, knowing it was useless. The old one opened its mouth, a simple hole that widened impossibly large. From inside came a sound like dozens of voices screaming at once. I recognized some of them. Anderson probably, the ranger before me. Others I didn't know, all screaming. The helicopter was close now, searchlights sweeping the hillside. When its light touched the creatures, they shrieked, not in pain, but in rage. The old one stopped its advance, looking up at the light. The pendant against my chest was blistering hot now. Acting on instinct, I tore it off and threw it at the old one. The small pouch hit its chest and burst open, spilling some kind of red powder. The effect was immediate. The old one convulsed, its body twisting in ways that should have broken every bone. The other creatures scattered, fleeing back into the forest. The old one's skin seemed to bubble and melt, revealing something underneath that my mind couldn't process. Shapes and angles that made no sense, that hurt to look at. The helicopter landed, and Merrill jumped out with 2 men I didn't recognize. They carried flamethrowers. "Get in!" Merrill shouted over the rotor noise. I didn't argue. I jumped into the helicopter as the men unleashed streams of fire at the writhing form of the old one. It screamed with those dozens of voices as it burned, the sound cutting through the helicopter noise like it was nothing. We lifted off as the men continued to burn everything, the creature, the ground around it, even part of the forest edge. I watched through the window as the fire spread, forming a barrier between the observation point and the trees. "Will that kill it?" I asked Merrill. He shook his head. "Nothing kills it, but it will go dormant for a while, sleep, heal. Then what? It comes back and starts taking people again? That's why we're shutting down your section of the park, permanently." The administration finally agreed after what happened to Sarah. "What do you mean? She seemed fine at the station." Merrill's face went grim. "She attacked a nurse last night, split her face open like—" He made a tearing motion with his hands. "She wasn't Sarah anymore, not really." We flew in silence after that. I'm on administrative leave now. They're sending in a specialized team to deal with the cabin, to burn my belongings. Contaminated, they said. I keep checking mirrors, afraid of seeing my face wrong, afraid that somehow the old one got a piece of me after all. I can still hear those voices when I try to sleep, the screams from inside it. I don't know what I encountered out there. Skinwalker, Wendigo, something else entirely. But I know it's still out there, waiting. And I know that somewhere in those woods, something with my face is walking around, learning to be human. I've been stationed at Yukon-Charlie Rivers National Preserve in Alaska for almost 3 years now. After my divorce and the financial mess that followed, I needed somewhere to disappear. This place, with its sprawling wilderness and minimal human contact, seemed perfect. I'm a park ranger here, living in a one-room cabin near the Nation River, about 2 hours by boat from Eagle, the closest thing to civilization around these parts. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what happened. I haven't told my supervisors, I haven't called the police. I haven't even told my father, but I need to tell someone, even if it's just strangers on the internet. It started 3 weeks ago. I was checking my trail cameras. I keep a few set up to monitor wildlife movements around my cabin. Nothing fancy, just basic motion-activated infrared cameras. I'd been tracking a wolf pack that had been moving through the area and wanted to see if they were still around. I brought the SD cards back to my cabin and plugged them into my laptop. The first few were normal: moose, caribou, a wolverine, the usual suspects. But the last card, that's when everything changed. The timestamp showed 3:17 a.m. 5 nights earlier. At first, I thought it was a person, maybe a lost hiker. But as I looked closer, I felt my blood turn to ice. The figure was humanoid, but wrong. Its proportions were off, limbs too long, too thin. It moved on all fours despite having a clearly bipedal form. But what really got to me were the eyes. They reflected the infrared light of the camera, but not like an animal's eyes would. There was awareness there, intelligence, like it was looking directly into the camera, directly at me. I told myself it was just a bear walking funny, or maybe a moose at a strange angle. The infrared can distort images. But deep down, I knew better. That night, I heard something circling my cabin. I've lived in the wilderness my whole life. I'm of Tlingit ancestry, and my grandfather taught me the old ways, how to track, how to listen to the forest. This wasn't a bear or a wolf. The footsteps were too deliberate. too rhythmic. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight, but couldn't bring myself to look out the window. Call it cowardice. Call it survival instinct. Whatever it was kept me frozen in place until dawn. When morning came, I checked around the cabin. That's when I found the tracks. They started as human footprints, very clear in the soft mud near my water pump, but as they circled the cabin, they changed, gradually transformed into something else, larger, deeper. Some were almost canine, but wrong, like a wolf print stretched and warped to accommodate a bipedal stance. I took photos but deleted them later. I was afraid of what someone might do if they saw them, afraid they'd shut down my station, make me leave. Or worse, afraid no one would believe me and I'd be stuck out here alone, knowing what I know. 2 days later, I got a call over the radio. A hiker named Jacob Reinhardt had missed his check-in. He was supposed to have reached Eagle 3 days ago, and his emergency contact was worried. His last known location was about 15 miles upriver from my cabin. I loaded up my boat with supplies for an overnight search. Part of me didn't want to go, not after what I'd seen, but it's my job. And honestly, I thought getting away from my cabin might do me good. Clear my head. The trip upriver was uneventful. I found Reinhardt's last campsite about 4 hours later. His tent was still there, but Reinhardt wasn't. His backpack was outside the tent, leaning against a tree. Food still hanging properly from a bear bag in a nearby spruce. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The tent had been torn. Not from the outside in, like a bear attack. From the inside out. Like something had been in the tent with him, and he'd tried to escape. I called out for hours, used my GPS to mark the location, and searched in expanding circles. Nothing. No blood. No signs of a struggle beyond the tent. Just nothing. As I was about to give up for the day, I noticed Reinhardt's journal sitting beside his sleeping bag inside the shredded tent. I know I shouldn't have, but I opened it. The first entries were typical hiker observations, trail conditions, wildlife sightings, weather notes. But the last 3 entries chilled me to the bone. He wrote about being followed, about hearing something moving parallel to his path through the woods, about feeling watched. The final entry, dated the night before he disappeared, described hearing his own voice calling from the trees, his name over and over. Then other voices, his wife, his brother, all calling him into the darkness. I know it's not them, he wrote, but it sounds so real. How does it know their voices? How does it know my name? I took the journal. I shouldn't have, but I did. I called in the coordinates of his camp and reported him missing. Then I headed back downriver. The sun was setting, and I didn't want to be out there after dark. I didn't make it back in time. About 5 miles from my cabin, heavy snow started falling. October in Alaska is unpredictable, but this came out of nowhere. Within minutes, visibility dropped to almost nothing. I had to slow the boat to avoid hitting submerged logs or rocks. That's when I heard it. My name, my full name, Dakota Williams, called out from the shoreline in my own voice. I killed the boat engine immediately. The sound echoed across the water, then silence. Just the soft patter of snow hitting the river. Dakota. My voice again from a different spot on the shore. I reached for my rifle. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip it. Dakota, help me. Not my voice this time. Jacob Reinhardt's voice. I'd only heard it once, on his voicemail when I tried calling his satellite phone, but I recognized it instantly. I'm hurt. Please help me. The voice moved along the shoreline, keeping pace with my drifting boat. I restarted the engine and gunned it, navigating by memory through the blinding snow. I kept as far from the shore as I dared, even though it meant risking obstacles in the deeper water. I made it back to my cabin just as full darkness fell. I dragged my boat up on shore and ran for the door, not bothering to secure it properly. Once inside, I locked the door, loaded my shotgun, and huddled in the center of the room. It didn't take long before the voices started again. My voice, Reinhardt's voice. Then, and this is when I nearly lost it, my mother's voice. My mother, who died when I was 12, calling my childhood nickname, the one only she used, asking me to let her in from the cold. The thing circled my cabin for hours, testing windows, scratching at the walls, tapping at the roof. The voices kept changing, people from my past, people I'd known for just a moment, all perfectly mimicked. It knew things it couldn't possibly know. Around 3 a.m., everything went quiet. I thought maybe it had left. I sat there, shotgun across my lap, waiting for dawn. Then came a knock at the door, gentle, polite. "Ranger Williams, it's Jacob Reinhardt. Thank God I found your cabin. I got lost in the storm." It sounded exactly like a normal human being, desperate, cold, afraid. Something made me reach for the small bag of salt I keep for cooking. My grandfather's voice in my head, telling me old stories about protective measures against things that weren't quite natural, things that the modern world pretends don't exist. "Ranger Williams? Please, I can see your light on. I'm freezing out here." Against every instinct, I approached the door. I positioned myself to the side, shotgun ready, and called out, "Step back from the door, 10 feet back where I can see you." I heard footsteps moving away. I took a deep breath, unlatched the door, and pulled it open just enough to look out. There was a man standing in the clearing before my cabin. In the light spilling from my doorway, he looked exactly like the driver's license photo of Jacob Reinhardt I'd been given for the search. Same build, same beard, same flannel jacket. But his eyes were wrong, flat, observant, like a predator's. And when he smiled in relief at seeing me, his mouth contained too many teeth. "Thank you," it said, taking a step forward. "I thought I was going to die out there." "Stay back," I said, raising the shotgun. Its head tilted slightly, an odd, jerky motion. "Is everything okay, Ranger Williams?" "You're not Jacob Reinhardt," I said. Its smile widened, just a fraction too much for a human face. "Of course I am. Who else would I be?" Another step forward. I threw the handful of salt directly into its face. The reaction was immediate and horrifying. Its skin blistered and smoked where the salt touched. It made a sound no human throat could produce, high and screeching and full of rage. The face rippled. That's the only word I can use. Like the skin was a mask that was slipping. I slammed the door shut and barricaded it with everything I could move. Outside, the thing howled and scratched at the walls, the windows, the roof. It switched rapidly between voices. Reinhardt, me, my mother, my ex-wife, my supervisor, even my grandfather, all begging, threatening, trying to trick me into opening the door again. I stayed in the center of the cabin, back to the wood stove, shotgun ready. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Dawn came slowly. As the first light filtered through my windows, the noises stopped. I waited an hour after full daylight before I dared to look outside. The clearing around my cabin was covered in tracks. Human footprints, wolf prints, something like a bear but not quite right, all mixed together, overlapping, circling my cabin. And on my door, gouged deep into the wood, was a symbol I recognized from my grandfather's teachings, a warning, a claim. I spent that day preparing. I called in sick over the radio, said I had food poisoning and couldn't make the scheduled supply run to another ranger station. Then I got to work. I made a circle of salt around my cabin, I found every piece of iron I owned, nails, tools, the cast iron skillet, and placed them at strategic points around the perimeter. I took out my grandfather's medicine pouch that I'd kept but never used. Inside was a small obsidian knife, red ochre, and a bundle of herbs I didn't recognize. There was a piece of paper with instructions written in his shaky handwriting. A ritual, a protection. At sunset, I cut my palm with the obsidian knife and let drops of my blood fall at the 4 cardinal directions around my cabin. I mixed the ochre with some of my blood and painted the protective symbols on my door, my windows, myself. Night fell. I waited. It came back, just as I knew it would, but this time it didn't immediately approach. I could sense it watching from the tree line, confused by the new barriers. "Dakota," it called in my grandfather's voice. "You're making a mistake. This isn't necessary." I didn't respond. I stood in my doorway, obsidian knife in one hand, shotgun in the other, and waited. "We've been here longer than your people," it said, dropping any pretense of being human. The voice now was wrong, layered, like multiple throats speaking in unison. "This was our hunting ground before your ancestors came. It will be our hunting ground after you're gone." "You've taken your last form," I said, repeating the words from my grandfather's instructions. "You've spoken your last stolen voice." It laughed, a terrible sound that made the trees themselves seem to lean away. "I've worn 100 skins, rangers, trappers, prospectors. I've been hunting here since before this land had a name. Not anymore." I stepped fully outside, completing the ritual with the final words my grandfather had written. Words in the Tlingit language that I barely understood but spoke with all the conviction I possessed. The thing howled in rage and burst from the tree line. In the moonlight, I caught glimpses of its true form as it shifted erratically between shapes. Elongated limbs, too many joints, a face that was neither human nor animal, but something ancient and wrong. It hit the salt line and recoiled as if burned. It tested the perimeter, looking for weaknesses, but the combination of salt, iron, blood, and the spoken ritual held it at bay. Just before dawn, it spoke one last time, now in a voice that was ancient and bitter. "We'll meet again, Dakota Williams, when your protections fail, when your vigilance slips, when you forget, as your kind always forgets." Then it was gone, melting into the pre-dawn shadows like mist. I spent the next day reinforcing my protections and searching through my grandfather's papers for more information. I found an old map where he had marked certain areas of the preserve with the same symbol that had been scratched into my door. Sacred places, dangerous places, places where the boundary between worlds was thin. My cabin, I realized, was built at the edge of one such area. I've put in for a transfer, made up some excuse about wanting to be closer to my father as he ages. While I wait for the paperwork to go through, I've maintained the protective measures, refreshed the salt line every day, kept iron nails hammered into my door frame. The search for Jacob Reinhardt was officially called off yesterday. They're saying he probably got disoriented and fell into the river, that the current carried his body away, that these things happen in the Alaskan wilderness. But I know better, and I know the thing is still out there waiting. Last night, I heard my own voice calling from the darkness again, more distant this time, unable to approach as closely as before, but patient, so patient. I haven't seen it on my trail cameras again, but sometimes, when I'm doing my rounds, I find tracks, human footprints that gradually transform into something else. And once, just once, I found a perfect imprint of a human hand in the mud near the river, except the fingers were too long, and they ended in points rather than fingertips. I don't know what I encountered out here. Skinwalker, Wendigo, something without a name. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's ancient, it's intelligent, and it's hunting. And for whatever reason, it's fixed its attention on me. I check the salt lines every morning and evening now. I keep the obsidian knife with me at all times. I sleep with my shotgun loaded with salt shells alongside regular buckshot, and I wait for my transfer papers to come through, hoping they arrive before it figures out how to get past my defenses, before it finds a way to wear my skin. I've been putting this off for weeks. Writing it down makes it real, you know. But I can't sleep, and maybe typing this out will help me process what happened. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. Hell, I barely believe it myself. I was a backcountry ranger at Denali National Park for 3 years. My name is Kaya Akiak. It means one who stays through winter in my grandmother's Anupiaq language. Pretty fitting considering I ended up alone in a cabin 50 miles from anything resembling civilization. Not exactly where I pictured myself after spending 6 figures on a wildlife biology degree. But the student loan companies don't care about your career aspirations when the payments come due. The park service position was a godsend. Housing provided, decent pay, and the isolation I craved after a messy breakup. My cabin was rustic but comfortable. Wood stove, propane fridge, solar panels for basic electricity, and a satellite radio for emergencies. Cell service, forget about it. Internet, only in my dreams. October in Alaska isn't for the faint-hearted. Darkness creeps in earlier each day, and the first serious snowfalls transform the landscape. That particular October night started like any other. I'd finished my evening radio check-in, stoked the wood stove, and was halfway through a dog-eared paperback when I heard it. My name, from outside. Kaya. It was my voice. Not similar, identical. The exact pitch and cadence I hear in videos of myself that always make me cringe. I nearly dropped my book. The windows were dark mirrors against the night, and the wind had picked up, rattling the metal roof. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, some weird auditory hallucination from too much solitude. Then it came again. Kaya, come outside. My throat closed up. I grabbed my flashlight and sidearm. We carry them for bear protection, and checked every lock twice. The voice called 3 more times, moving around the perimeter of my cabin. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I told myself it was just exhaustion playing tricks. The radio crackled to life during my morning check-in. Kaya, we've got a situation. My supervisor Jeff's voice came through. Solo hiker missing in your sector. Daniel Heller, 34, was supposed to check in at Wonder Lake 3 days ago. Never showed. Great. Search and rescue in fresh snow. Last known coordinates? I asked, jotting down the information as Jeff related. His emergency beacon sent a signal about 15 miles northeast of your position. Trail camera caught him heading that way 4 days ago. Weather's closing in again tonight. If you can get eyes on the area today, that'd be helpful. I packed my day bag, extra layers, first aid kit, emergency shelter, rations, bear spray, GPS unit, and my camera. The sun was barely lifting over the mountains when I set out, snowshoes crunching through 6 inches of fresh powder. The forest was eerily quiet. No birds, no small mammals rustling in the underbrush. Just my breathing and the squeak of snow under my feet. About 5 miles in, I spotted tracks crossing my path. Wolf prints, fresh ones. I've studied wolf behavior for years. These weren't normal. Wolf packs move with purpose, but with natural variation. They zigzag, stop to mark territory, follow game trails. These tracks formed a perfectly straight line, as if drawn with a ruler. And then, Mid-stride, they just stopped, like the wolf had been lifted away mid-step. No diverging prints, no signs of struggle, just gone. I photographed the tracks and marked the location on my GPS. Another mile in, I found more strange tracks. What looked like moose, then suddenly human footprints, then nothing. By early afternoon, I reached the coordinates of Heller's beacon. His campsite was intact, tent still pitched in a small clearing, backpack inside. The tent fabric was torn, but not in a way that suggested bears or wolves. It was ripped from the inside out. His sleeping bag, clothes, even his wallet with $200 cash were untouched. His half-eaten protein bar was still sitting on top of his backpack. Whatever happened, it happened fast. The only thing that seemed disturbed was his digital camera lying in the snow a few feet from the tent. I picked it up, relieved when it powered on. Scrolling through the images made my blood run cold. The first dozen were typical tourist shots, mountain vistas, wildlife, selfies on the trail. Then they got weird, blurry shots of the forest at night. A strange, elongated shadow that didn't match the trees. A series of 3 photos showing something moving between the trees. Too tall and thin to be human, but definitely bipedal. The final image was the worst. A figure standing about 50 yards from the camera, wearing what looked like traditional native clothing. But its face was just blank, smooth skin where features should be. The image was crystal clear, not blurry like the others. I nearly dropped the camera when I heard it. A soft clicking sound, like bones knocking together, coming from the trees behind me. Click, click, click. Getting closer. I grabbed Heller's camera and ran. I didn't stop until I was 2 miles away, lungs burning, legs shaking. The clicking sound didn't follow me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched the entire way back to my cabin. The sky darkened early, heavy clouds promising more snow. I radioed in my findings as soon as I got back, downloading the camera images to my laptop. Jeff said they'd send a helicopter when weather permitted, but the storm moving in would ground all aircraft for at least 48 hours. "Stay put," he ordered. "Document everything, but don't go back to that site alone." The first snowflakes began falling as night settled in. I triple-checked all the locks, built up the fire, and tried to distract myself with paperwork. The wind picked up around 10 p.m., howling through the trees like a living thing. I kept thinking I heard my name in the gusts. At midnight, the scratching started, gentle at first. Could have been a branch against the window. Then more insistent, methodical, moving from window to window, then to the door. Something was testing every entry point of my cabin. "Kaya," my voice again from outside. "Let me in. I'm cold." I clutched my sidearm, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Your father left because of you, Kaya. He told me so." My blood froze. My dad had abandoned us when I was 7. I'd never told anyone at the park about that. "Remember the blue shirt you wore when he drove away? The one with the little whales? He saw you crying in it through the rearview mirror. He told me he almost turned around." This wasn't possible. Nobody knew these details. Not even my mom knew which shirt I'd been wearing that day. Something heavy moved across my roof. Footsteps, but wrong somehow, like the feet were on backward. I heard scraping at the chimney cap, then thumping inside the flue. I threw another log in the wood stove, heart pounding as whatever it was retreated from the heat. I grabbed my grandmother's old journal from my bookshelf. Nana had passed down this handwritten book when I turned 18, saying it contained our family's traditional knowledge. I'd skimmed it before, but dismissed most of it as superstition. Now I frantically flipped through the pages, looking for anything about creatures that could mimic voices. There it was, a section about entities our people called Kilut, skinwalkers, beings that could take on human appearance and voice, but were betrayed by their unnatural movements. The journal described protective measures. Iron repels them, salt blinds them, fire reveals their true form. I worked through the night, placing iron nails at every window, lining the doorway with salt, keeping the fire roaring. Outside, the thing with my voice kept calling, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening. Sometimes it used my mother's voice or my ex's, always knowing things only they should know. At dawn, the voices stopped. I peeked through the curtains and nearly screamed. Standing at the tree line were multiple versions of me. 3 of them, all wearing ranger uniforms from throughout my career, including my current one. They stood perfectly still, watching my cabin. Their proportions were slightly wrong, arms too long, necks too flexible, and their faces. The features were blurred, like someone had smudged wet clay. My grandmother's journal mentioned a ritual, a way to bind a skinwalker to prevent it from hunting in those grounds again. It required knowing the creature's true name and speaking it at dawn while burning specific herbs. I didn't have the herbs, but I had something else, a small pouch of tobacco Nana had given me for protection. Traditional tobacco, not the commercial kind. With shaking hands, I opened the wood stove, sprinkled in the tobacco, and spoke the name written in the journal, a name I won't repeat here. The smoke from the chimney turned black, then brilliant blue. Outside, the copies of me began to convulse. Their movements became jerky, inhuman. One dropped to all 4s, its limbs bending in impossible directions. The other 2 began to shriek, not with my voice anymore, but with a sound like metal scraping metal. "We were here before your kind named themselves human," one hissed, its mouth stretching too wide. "We will be here when your cities are dust." I continued the ritual, binding the entity to an ancient spruce tree at the edge of the clearing. The creatures fought it, clawing at the air as if caught in an invisible net. As the sun fully crested the mountain, they were pulled toward the tree, their bodies stretching and distorting until they melded with the bark. Their faces pressed outward from the wood for a moment before sinking in completely. The silence afterward was deafening. The search team found Daniel Heller's body 2 days later, frozen in a ravine 3 miles from his campsite. The official report says he fell while hiking at night. It doesn't mention that his face was completely smooth, featureless except for a single vertical slash where his mouth should have been. I resigned from the Park Service the following week, told them the isolation was getting to me. In a way, that was true. I've dedicated myself to documenting my grandmother's traditional knowledge since then. What I once dismissed as folklore and superstition, I now recognize as survival information, disguised and preserved for future generations. Sometimes at night, I still hear my own voice calling from outside my apartment, though I live on the 14th floor now. Sometimes I see myself standing in a crowd, watching me. The other me always wears my old ranger uniform. No one believes me, of course. Why would they? But if you're ever in the deep wilderness and hear your own voice calling from the darkness, or see yourself standing among the trees, don't answer, don't approach, and whatever you do, don't let it in. I've been sitting on this experience for 6 years, and I still don't know whether sharing it is the right thing to do. But keeping it bottled up isn't working anymore. Every time I hear a branch crack or the wind whistle through trees, I'm back there. So here goes. I was 27 when I took the ranger position at Everwood Station in northern Montana. It was about as remote as you can get in the continental U.S. No cell service, nearest town about 80 miles southeast, and the only regular human contact was a weekly radio check-in with headquarters. My family thought I was crazy turning down that marketing job in Seattle, especially after working so hard for my business degree. But after growing up on the Blackfeet Reservation, I couldn't stomach the thought of being trapped in an office building. Nature was always where I felt safe, where I could breathe, where my father couldn't find me when he'd been drinking. The first 2 weeks at Everwood were peaceful. I patrolled the trails, documented wildlife sightings, maintained the small research station, and enjoyed the solitude. The cabin was nothing special. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, living area with a desk for reports, and a covered porch that faced a meadow before the tree line. Simple, but it felt like home almost immediately. Then the calls started. It was during my 3rd week, around 2 a.m. I woke up to what I first thought was singing. Not like human singing, but this sort of undulating, rising and falling sound that carried through the valley. It wasn't a wolf. I know what wolves sound like. This was different, lower, then higher than any wolf could manage, with a rhythm to it, almost like it was trying to form words. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. The sound stopped immediately. The forest went completely silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing, just dead silence. I stood there for nearly 20 minutes, but whatever made that sound was gone, and eventually the normal forest sounds returned. I told myself it was probably just some unknown bird call carried from a distance. The next morning, I headed out on my regular patrol, following Creekside Trail down to the river. About a mile in, I saw them, footprints in the mud near the bank, massive footprints. My boot is size 12, and these were nearly twice as long and 3 times as wide. They were clearly bipedal, with 5 distinct toe impressions. Too large for a bear, and bears don't typically walk on their hind legs for extended distances. These tracks went for about 50 yards before vanishing into the rocky terrain. I took photos and measurements, telling myself they were probably just some weird impression made by overlapping animal tracks or water erosion. But I knew better. Those were footprints from something that walked on 2 legs. For the next few days, I kept finding more evidence. Broken branches too high up for a normal person to reach. More tracks, even tufts of dark brown hair caught on tree bark that didn't match any known animal in the region. I collected samples in Ziploc bags but never sent them in. Part of me was afraid of the ridicule, and part of me, I don't know, felt protective of whatever was out there. Then I saw it. I was checking the eastern boundary of my patrol area. It was late afternoon, and the light was getting dim in the dense forest. I heard a branch snap about 50 yards ahead and froze. Through the trees, I could make out a massive figure standing upright. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair, with arms that hung down almost to its knees. It was just standing there watching me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We just stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then it turned and moved into the denser part of the forest, disappearing with an agility that seemed impossible for something so large. It barely made a sound as it went, just a slight rustling of branches and then nothing. I practically ran back to the cabin, locked the door, and poured myself a double whiskey with shaking hands. Being raised on the reservation, I'd grown up with stories of forest spirits and creatures that lived in the wilderness. My grandmother called them the Ancient Ones. Other tribes had different names: Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Wendigo, but I never thought, I never believed. That night the calls came again, closer this time. They seemed to circle the cabin, sometimes sounding like they were just beyond the tree line, other times like they were right outside my window. I barely slept, my shotgun across my lap. In the morning I found the first gift on my porch, a bundle of wildflowers arranged in a specific pattern, clearly deliberate. I left them there, unsure what to do. The next day, it was polished river stones in the same pattern. The day after, a perfectly woven basket made of pine needles. I debated radioing headquarters, but what would I say? Hey, I think Bigfoot is leaving me presents. They'd have me evaluated for mental health issues faster than I could blink. The calls continued every night, getting closer and louder. I started leaving my own gifts, a carved wooden figure, some dried jerky, a small jar of honey. Each morning they were gone, replaced with something new. Then came the night that changed everything. I'd finally managed to fall into an uneasy sleep around midnight when I was jolted awake by a thunderous pounding on the cabin wall. It was so powerful the whole structure shook. Then silence. I grabbed my shotgun and waited, heart racing. Boom! Another impact, this time at the door. The wooden frame splintered, and the door exploded inward, hinges torn from the wall. And there it stood, filling the entire door frame. The creature. Massive shoulders hunched to fit under the top of the doorway, dark fur glistening in the moonlight, and its eyes. God, its eyes. Yellow with vertical pupils like a cat's but larger, more intelligent. They fixed on me with an intensity that froze me in place. I raised my shotgun with trembling hands, but I couldn't pull the trigger. Something in those eyes stopped me. Then it spoke. Its mouth moved, and a voice came out that sounded like rocks grinding together, deep and rough but unmistakably forming words. "I am Kogwini," it said, "guardian of Everwood." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. "You walk our lands," it continued, "but you are unfit. You bring darkness with you." "What? What do you want?" I finally managed to croak out. "You run from your past, Chatin Longtree. You ran from your father's fists. You ran from your people. You ran from yourself, always running." How did it know my name? How did it know about my father? "I didn't run," I said, finding my voice. "I'm trying to protect this place." "You hide," Kogwini growled. "You hide your truth. You hide your shame. You believe you do not belong anywhere, not with your people, not with the white man's world, not even here." Every word hit me like a physical blow because it was all true. I'd never felt like I belonged on the reservation, but I'd never felt like I fit in the outside world either. I'd taken this isolated post because it was easier than trying to find my place among people. "I should tear you apart," Kogwini said, taking a step into the cabin. "Remove you from our forest." I closed my eyes, certain I was about to die. "But the ancient tree has shown me another path," it continued. "You will journey to the heart of Everwood. You will face what you have been running from. If you emerge, you may stay as true guardian. If not—" It didn't finish the sentence. It didn't need to. "When?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "When the sun rises," Kogwini said. Then it turned and disappeared into the night, moving with that same impossible silence and speed. I sat awake the rest of the night, the broken door letting in the cold mountain air. Part of me wanted to radio for extraction, to get the hell out of there. But a deeper part knew this was something I needed to face. At first light, I packed a small bag with water, some food, my knife, and a lighter. I had no idea how far the heart of Everwood was, or what I'd find there, but I knew I had to go. I started walking east, into the densest part of the forest, following some instinct I couldn't explain. The forest grew thicker the further I went, the trees older and larger. The sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. I walked for hours, pushing through undergrowth, climbing over fallen logs, wading across small streams. The temperature dropped noticeably the deeper I went. The normal forest sounds faded until I was walking in eerie silence. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own breathing and footsteps. By mid-afternoon, I reached a clearing I'd never seen before, never even knew existed. In the center stood the largest tree I'd ever seen, ancient, gnarled, its trunk wider than my cabin. Its bark was deeply furrowed, almost black, and it seemed to pulse with a life of its own. This had to be the ancient tree Cogini mentioned. As I approached, a wave of dizziness hit me. The clearing seemed to shimmer and distort. I fell to my knees, my head spinning. Suddenly, I wasn't in the clearing anymore. I was 7 years old, hiding in the closet as my father raged through our house, looking for me after I'd spilled his whiskey. I could hear my mother crying, begging him to stop. The scene shifted. I was 12, being beaten by white kids from the neighboring town who called me Dirty Indian while their friends laughed. I was 16, getting my acceptance letter to college and seeing the mix of pride and betrayal in my grandmother's eyes when I told her I was leaving the reservation. I was 23, standing at my father's funeral, feeling nothing but relief that he was gone and hating myself for it. I was 27, sitting alone in my apartment in Seattle, surrounded by job offers and feeling utterly empty. Every painful memory, every moment of shame, every instance of not belonging, they all crashed over me in waves. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was drowning in my own past. Always running, Cogini's voice echoed in my mind. Always hiding. And he was right. My whole life had been about escape, running from my father, running from the reservation, running from the corporate world, running from myself. No more, I whispered, forcing myself to my feet. The visions continued to assault me, but I pushed forward, one step at a time toward the ancient tree. No more running. With each step, the pain grew worse. Every regret, every fear, every moment of self-loathing intensified until it was almost unbearable. But I kept going. When I finally reached the tree, I placed my hands on its massive trunk. The bark was warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes. I am Chataine Longtree, I said aloud. I am Blackfeet. I am a protector of this forest. I am not running anymore. Something broke inside me, not like shattering, but like a dam giving way. Tears streamed down my face as years of buried emotion poured out. I sank to my knees, forehead pressed against the ancient bark, and let it all go. I don't know how long I stayed there. The light had changed when I finally opened my eyes. The setting sun cast long shadows through the clearing. And Cogini was there, watching me from the edge of the trees. You did not run, it said simply. No, I replied, getting to my feet. I'm done running. Cogini approached, moving with that strange grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Up close, I could see intelligence in those yellow eyes, wisdom older than any human could comprehend. The ancient tree has judged you worthy, Cogini said. You may remain as guardian of Everwood. What does that mean? I asked. It means you protect this place, from those who would harm it, from those who would exploit it, and in return, Everwood protects you. Cogini extended one massive hand. In it was a small wooden token, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Carry this, it said. The others will know you by it. Others? I asked. There are more like you? Cogini made a sound that might have been laughter. We have many forms, many names. We have walked these lands since before your kind stood upright. We will walk them long after you are gone. I took the token, feeling its weight, heavier than it should have been, as if it carried more than just wood. You will see us now, Kogwini continued, now that your eyes are truly open, but few others will. This is the way it must be. With that, Kogini turned and walked away, disappearing into the forest like mist. I made my way back to the cabin as night fell, finding the path easier now, as if the forest itself was guiding me. When I arrived, the door had been repaired, looking as if it had never been broken. I never reported any of this. How could I? But in the years since, I've seen things in these woods that defy explanation. Shadows that move against the wind, lights that hover between trees, and sometimes in the distance I hear those calls again. But now they don't frighten me. They're a reminder that I'm not alone. I'm still a ranger at Everwood Station. On paper, my job hasn't changed. I maintain trails, record wildlife sightings, and keep the research station running. But I know my real purpose now. I belong here. I always did. It just took Kogini to help me see it. The wooden token sits on my desk as I write this. Sometimes I swear it moves on its own, shifting position when I'm not looking. Sometimes it gets warm to the touch for no reason. And sometimes on the darkest nights, it glows. I'm still jumpy when I hear branches snap outside my apartment. It's been 2 months since everything happened, but I'm seriously considering moving again. Yesterday I saw it watching me from the construction site across the street. Phoenix doesn't feel far enough anymore. Let me start from the beginning. I served 8 years as a staff sergeant, specialized in solo recon operations. My dad was military too, tough as nails, but a good man. My mom's Navajo taught me all about respecting the land and the old stories. I never really bought into those stories until now. I'd been out of active duty for about a year when Colonel Blackwood called me. I was struggling with my dad's medical bills after he passed, and my cabin lease was up for renewal. Money was tight, so when Blackwood offered double my usual contract rate for a specialized reconnaissance mission, I couldn't say no. The briefing was weird from the start. Blackwood showed me thermal imaging from Tonto National Forest near Apache Junction, strange heat signatures, equipment failures, and 2 teams already missing. I figured it was probably some cartel activity or maybe a survivalist group. I've dealt with both before. We need someone who can move quietly and knows the terrain, Blackwood told me. Your background makes you uniquely qualified, Nakai. He was talking about my Navajo heritage, though he didn't say it outright. I almost rolled my eyes, but the money was too good. They gave me standard gear, plus some extra thermal imaging equipment, and dropped me at an old ranger cabin that hadn't been used in years. The first 2 days were uneventful. I set up motion sensors in a perimeter around the cabin, established communication protocols, and did some initial scouting. The forest felt off somehow, too quiet in some places, too noisy in others. I told myself it was just my imagination. On the 3rd day, things changed. My sat phone started going in and out, and the GPS kept glitching. That night, I was checking my perimeter when I saw it for the first time. A massive silhouette standing at the tree line watching the cabin. It was huge, at least 7 feet tall and broad. I grabbed my rifle and light, but when I aimed the beam toward it, whatever it was had vanished, just disappeared into the trees without making a sound, which is impossible for something that size. I barely slept that night, kept my rifle close and listened to every creak and groan of that old cabin. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just a bear, though deep down I knew better. The coordinates Blackwood gave me led deeper into the forest, away from any trails. I headed out at first light, moving as quietly as I could. The forest felt wrong. Anyone who spends time in the wilderness knows it has a rhythm, a feeling. This was different. I passed game trails that should have been full of tracks but weren't. The birds would go completely silent when I entered certain areas, then suddenly start chattering all at once. Around midday, I picked up a smell, like rotting meat mixed with something musky I couldn't identify. The hairs on my neck stood up. I served in some pretty rough places overseas, and you develop instincts. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back. I kept going because that's the job. Around 3 p.m., I found a clearing that looked wrong. The trees around it were twisted, not like normal growth. In the center was a deer carcass, half-eaten. I've seen plenty of predator kills, but this was different. The wounds were precise, almost surgical. No animal I know kills like that. I took photos and samples like protocol demanded, the whole time feeling like I was being watched. You know that feeling when someone's staring at the back of your head? It was like that, but heavier, more intense. I started heading back as dusk approached, didn't want to get caught out after dark. That's when I saw the footprint by a small stream. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was huge, about 18 inches long with 5 splayed toes. Not a bear, not anything I recognized. I took more photos, measurements, made a quick plaster cast. While I was kneeling there, I heard it, a low, guttural moan that didn't sound like any animal I've ever heard. It was intelligent somehow, deliberate. I looked across the stream and saw it standing there, partially hidden by the trees. The silhouette was massive, broad-shouldered, and distinctly bipedal. I couldn't make out details in the fading light, but I could feel it watching me, studying me. Then it just melted back into the forest. I knew I wouldn't make it back to the cabin before dark, and I didn't want to be caught in the open. About a quarter-mile from my position, I remembered seeing a small cave entrance. I decided to hole up there for the night, figuring it was defensible, at least better than being exposed. Big mistake. The cave entrance was narrow enough that anything large would have trouble getting in quickly. I wedged myself in, using my flashlight to check the interior. The cave opened up into a larger space, and that's when my blood ran cold. The floor had been cleared of debris. There was a crude bed made of dried grasses in one corner. Someone, or something, was using this cave. Against my better judgment, I moved deeper inside. There was a collection of objects arranged against one wall, torn hiking equipment, cameras, even a smashed GPS unit. I recognized military-grade gear, too, the kind the previous teams would have carried. As I moved even deeper, I found the bones, human and animal, arranged in patterns that made no sense to me. Some were obviously old, bleached white. Others were fresher. I found dog tags belonging to members of the missing teams. I needed to get out of there. But as I turned to leave, my radio suddenly crackled to life with static. Through the noise, I heard what sounded like a human voice, not alone in there. That's when I heard the breathing. Something was in the cave with me. Something big. I killed my light immediately and pressed myself against the wall, relying on my night ops training. I controlled my breathing, staying absolutely still. I could hear it moving, sniffing the air. It knocked my backpack over, and my light rolled across the floor, briefly illuminating it. I only got a glimpse, but it was enough to haunt me forever. Tall, broad, covered in dark hair. Not fur like a bear, hair. And its eyes caught the light, reflecting red like a predator's. But the eyes, they weren't animal eyes. There was something behind them, intelligence. It moved past me, close enough that I felt its breath. It smelled like rot and wet earth. I stayed frozen until I heard it move deeper into the cave, probably confused by my scent trail. I had placed reflective markers on my way in. Standard procedure. I followed them out, moving as silently as possible. When I got outside, twilight had fallen. I ran. I'd like to say I kept my cool and made a tactical retreat, but that would be a lie. I ran like hell, barely paying attention to my direction, just wanting to put distance between me and that cave. I eventually oriented myself and made it back to the cabin around midnight. I barricaded the door and windows and sat with my back to the wall, rifle ready, until morning. At first light, I packed essential gear and headed out toward the extraction point, abandoning the mission. The thing is, I knew it was following me. I could feel it. Twice, I caught glimpses of it moving parallel to my path, always keeping trees between us. It was hurting me, I realized later, trying to direct my path. I made it to the extraction point and got the hell out of there. Reported everything to Blackwood, who seemed unsurprised. That's when I realized this wasn't the first time they'd encountered this thing. They knew what they were sending me into. I quit on the spot, told him to find someone else for his suicide missions. He tried to get me to sign some non-disclosure forms, but I walked out. What were they gonna do? Court-martial a civilian contractor? I thought it was over when I got back to Phoenix. I was wrong. 3 days after I got back, I noticed a smell in my apartment. That same rotten musk odor from the forest. My window was still locked, but something had been inside. Nothing was taken, but things were moved slightly, like someone had been examining them. A week later, I saw it for the first time in the city. 3 in the morning, I was having trouble sleeping and looked out my window. It was standing in the parking lot, looking up at my apartment, just watching. When our eyes met, it didn't run. It tilted its head almost curiously. I've relocated twice since then. It keeps finding me. Last week I found one of my dad's old military pins, something I keep in my jewelry box, placed carefully on my kitchen counter when I woke up. I never take that pin out. It had been in the apartment when I wasn't. It's learning about me, studying me. It knows my name now. I found it scratched into the dirt outside my building. It's figured out how to move through the city undetected, using construction sites, drainage systems, parks. I've been researching Navajo legends, calling my mom, asking about the old stories. There are beings in our traditions that match what I saw. Ancient things that learned to hunt humans, that grew more cunning as humans grew more dangerous. Mom warned me not to speak about it directly, said that naming it gives it power. Last night was the final straw. I woke up at 2 a.m. to find my bedroom door open. I always close it before sleeping. There was mud on my floor, leading to the foot of my bed, then back out. It had stood there watching me sleep. I don't know what to do anymore. If I go to the authorities, I'll sound crazy. Blackwood won't help. Whatever this is, they want to study it, not stop it. I'm thinking of heading back to the reservation, surrounding myself with family. But part of me knows that would just put them in danger too. It's watching me right now as I type this. I can feel it. It's learning my patterns, waiting for the perfect moment. It's patient. It has all the time in the world. I don't. I've been home for 48 hours and I still can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see that damn smile. Writing this down might help get it out of my head, but I doubt it. Some things you can't unsee. I guess I should start by explaining that I'm an ex-Army Ranger, Navajo by birth. I've done 6 tours overseas, And I've seen some bad shit, but nothing like what I found in Bear Canyon. 2 weeks ago, I got a call from an old commander who'd moved to a private security contractor. We all know what that means. He said they needed someone with my skill set for a quick job on the Mogollon Rim in Arizona. Good money, just a few days of work. I wasn't going to take it until he mentioned the figure, enough to fix my grandfather's cabin roof and pay off the medical bills that have been piling up since he got sick. The official paperwork said environmental assessment, but the actual briefing was something else entirely. 5 hikers had gone missing in a remote section of the canyon, not just anywhere, but in an area with a history of disappearances going back decades. My commander laid it out straight. This isn't the first time, Kimmy. Something's hunting out there. The Forest Service had found massive tracks they couldn't identify, hair samples that didn't match any known species. Rangers reported sounds that made grown men refuse to go back. The military was interested because whatever was out there was getting bolder, coming closer to populated areas. They wanted me specifically because of my background, not just the ranger training, but being Navajo. My grandfather had taught me tracking and hunting since I could walk. I grew up on stories of skinwalkers and other things that hunt in the dark. I'd always thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off. I'm not so sure anymore. I packed light, just my survival gear, a sidearm, which I wasn't supposed to have, but screw that, and emergency supplies. The drive up to the trailhead took 4 hours from Phoenix. I remember feeling uneasy the whole way, like something was watching me through the windshield. Just nerves, I told myself. I started at first light. The ranger station had the last known coordinates of the missing hikers, a group of grad students doing research on indigenous cliff dwellings. Their professor had reported them missing when they missed 2 check-ins. The trail was easy enough to follow at first. These weren't inexperienced hikers. They'd stuck to established paths, marked their route. Everything seemed normal until I reached Whispering Falls around midday. That's when I noticed the silence. If you've spent any time in the wilderness, you know it's never truly quiet. There's always birds, insects, the rustling of small animals, but around the falls, nothing. Dead silence, except for the water. I felt the hair on my neck stand up, every instinct telling me something was wrong. I found their campsite about a mile past the falls. It looked like they'd left in a hurry, food still in containers, sleeping bags unrolled. No signs of a struggle, though. That was weird. If it had been a bear or mountain lion, there would have been damage, blood. Their tracks led away from camp toward an area of ancient cliff dwellings. The stride patterns were normal at first. 5 sets of boots, well-spaced, deliberate. Then suddenly they changed. The stride length doubled, like they'd all started running at the same time, and overlaid on their tracks were others. Massive impressions, easily 20 inches long, with 5 distinct toes, not bear, not human either. The depth of the impressions suggested whatever made them weighed at least 300 pounds. I followed the merged tracks to a narrow crack in the rock face, partially hidden behind a scrub pine. It didn't look natural, more like something had clawed it wider. Inside was a tight tunnel, barely wide enough for my shoulders. The air coming from it was cold and damp, smelling of wet stone and something else, something metallic and wrong. Every instinct told me to turn back, call for backup. But I kept thinking about those kids, and my grandfather's roof, and those damn medical bills. I turned on my flashlight and squeezed inside. The tunnel ran about 30 feet before opening into a large chamber. My light didn't reach the ceiling, but I could feel the space around me, vast and hollow. The floor descended to a black pool of still water that took up most of the cavern. The silence was absolute. That's when I saw the first body. It was lying beside the pool, what was left of it. Male based on the clothes, probably one of the hikers. But the body, it had been stripped of meat with surgical precision, no tearing or ripping like an animal would do. It was methodical, deliberate. The skin had been removed in one piece and laid beside it like a discarded coat. I've seen dead bodies before. I've seen IEDs turn people inside out. But this made me vomit. When I recovered, I swept my light across the pool to the far wall. I almost screamed when I saw them. Dozens of reflective eyes staring back at me from alcoves in the rock. As I steadied the beam, I realized they weren't eyes. They were bodies, standing upright in the niches, perfectly preserved, some fresh, others ancient, leathery and dried in the cave air. A collection, a fucking trophy room. I was backing away when I heard it, a splash from the pool, then a voice from one of the tunnels branching off the main chamber. "Help! Is someone there? Please!" It was a young woman's voice, terrified and desperate. "We're trapped down here." "Hello?" I called back, asking who was there. The voice identified herself as Emily, one of the missing hikers. She said she was with James, that they were the only survivors, that they'd been hiding from it. I started toward the tunnel when something stopped me, a memory from my grandfather, a story about creatures in the canyon that could mimic voices to lure prey deeper into their territory. "Emily," I called, "I'm going to need you to come to me. I have a weapon and supplies." There was a pause. Then, "I can't. James is hurt. Please, you have to help us." I hesitated. "What's my name, Emily?" "The ranger who came looking for you. What's my name?" Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Kimmy Blackfeather. You're Kimmy Blackfeather." My blood went cold. I had never identified myself to anyone connected with this mission by my full name. My commander knew it, but these hikers? No way. Before I could react, I heard movement in the tunnel, something massive shifting in the darkness. I swung my light toward the sound and caught a glimpse of something pale and emaciated disappearing around a bend, something that moved on all fours but was definitely not an animal. I ran, no shame in admitting it. I turned and sprinted back through the entrance tunnel, scraping my shoulders raw on the narrow walls. Behind me I heard a wet sliding sound and a voice that was no longer trying to sound human, a high-pitched chittering followed by a deep, rattling growl. I burst out of the crack into daylight, but I didn't stop running until I'd put half a mile between me and that place. When I finally paused to catch my breath, I heard something echoing from the cave entrance. My name, called in 5 different voices, one after another. Then laughter, like someone trying to imitate the sound without understanding what it meant. I needed to report this, to call in whatever the hell was appropriate. SWAT, military, fucking flamethrowers. I headed back toward my vehicle at a steady jog, constantly checking over my shoulder. The forest remained unnaturally quiet. About halfway to the trailhead, I spotted someone on the path ahead, a man in hiking clothes, bent over as if studying the ground. Relief flooded through me. "Hey!" I called out. "You need to get out of here. It's not safe." The man straightened and turned. It was older, bearded, wearing a university field jacket. His movements were stiff, like he wasn't used to his body. "Oh, thank God," he said, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "I'm James Blackwood from the university. Have you seen my students? We got separated when—" I cut him off. "How long have you been out here, James?" He blinked, confused. 3 days. We were documenting the cliff dwellings when something attacked our camp. I've been hiding, trying to find help." His story made sense, but something felt wrong. His skin seemed too tight across his face. His eyes didn't blink enough. "What university are you with?" I asked. "Arizona State? We're on a grant studying—" "What department?" He hesitated just for a second. "Anthropology." I nodded, keeping my distance. "The ranger station said you were from Northern Arizona University's archaeology department." His face didn't change expression for several seconds. Then slowly, his mouth stretched into a smile that kept widening beyond what a human jaw should allow. "Clever," he said, his voice deepening, losing its human cadence. "They said you would be." I drew my sidearm, but James was already changing, his skin rippling and stretching as something underneath pushed out. His jacket tore as his shoulders widened and elongated. The thing that emerged was at least 8 feet tall, with impossibly long arms that nearly reached the ground. Its skin was pale and translucent, stretched over a frame that resembled a human's but was all wrong in its proportions. Its face was the worst part, still partially James's, but the lower jaw had split and extended, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I fired 3 rounds into its chest. It stumbled back but didn't fall. Dark fluid oozed from the wounds, but it seemed more annoyed than injured. I didn't wait to see more. I ran again, crashing through the underbrush away from the trail. I could hear it pursuing me, moving through the forest with a speed that nothing that size should possess. It traveled on all 4s, making a sound like wet meat slapping against stone. I lost it by crossing a fast-moving stream and doubling back along a ridge. By the time I reached my vehicle, the sun was setting. I've never driven so fast down a mountain road in my life. I thought I was safe when I reached my grandfather's cabin. I was wrong. The door was open when I arrived. Inside, the walls were covered with handprints, the same red handprints I'd seen painted in the cave. Dozens of them, still wet, pressed into the wood like a message, a marking, a claim. My truck was parked about a mile down the road. I'd walked up to the cabin because the old access road was washed out. I grabbed my go bag and my grandfather's old rifle and started running down the dirt path. I was halfway to my truck when I heard that chittering sound from the trees to my right. The thing emerged from the shadows, moving on all 4s but rising to its full height when it saw me. In the moonlight, its skin glowed a sickly white. The face that had been James's was gone now, replaced by something ancient and hungry. It knew my name. It called it again in that awful approximation of a human voice. Then it charged. I fired the rifle and ran. I don't know if I hit it. I just kept running until I reached my truck, fumbling with the keys as branches snapped behind me. I made it to the highway and drove until I hit a gas station 20 miles away. As I was filling up, shaking so hard I could barely hold the pump, I noticed a man watching me from the edge of the parking lot. He was standing perfectly still, his face hidden in shadow, but I could see his smile, wide and unnatural in the dim light. I've been driving ever since, staying in motels, moving every night, but I know it's following me, hunting me. Twice now I've seen that same figure, always at a distance, always smiling. I called my old commander to report what happened. He told me to come in, that they'd debrief me properly, but I don't trust them now. Why did they really send me there? What did they know about that thing? I looked up the history of that area last night. The disappearances go back centuries. The Navajo have stories about a place in those mountains where skinwalkers learn to wear men's bodies from a darker, older thing that lives in the caves. My grandfather tried to warn me about those places. Some things, he said, hunt more than your body. I don't think I'm just being followed. I think I've been marked, claimed. Last night, in my motel room, I woke up to find handprints on the bathroom mirror, red, still wet. I don't think I'm alone anymore, and I don't know how to make it stop.